Chapter 1665. The hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. The four gods' disciples stared at Ji Tianqing without blinking. They even forgot to breathe. After a long while, they came back to their senses and looked shocked. "You are really a freak. In just 3 months, you managed to level up by 2 cultivation levels." Qin Sangqiong was a man of few words. Even he could not help but exclaim. The way he looked at Ji Tianqing was filled with surprise and envy. Before he met Ji Tianqing, he thought highly of himself and looked down on all the geniuses from different countries. However, Ji Tianqing made him taste the taste of failure. Ji Tianqing's speed of advancement made him gasp in amazement, and he was beaten black and blue all over. Song Zhanyu shook his head and exclaimed, "That's impossible. That's impossible. Even the number 1 genius in the world could not create such a miracle. I understand now. It must be the little prince who brought him to the kingdom of God and rewarded him with the elixir. Yes, that must be it." Song Zhanyu had seen how powerful Ji Tianqing was. However, he still could not accept that Ji Tianqing was so powerful. Therefore, he believed that Jiu must have given Ji Tianqing some kind of elixir to help him level up by 1 cultivation level. Yin Wuxi's reaction was still calm. Other than excitement, he was also happy for Ji Tianqing. However, Jiang Ningxue's expression and emotions were the most complicated among all of them. She did not speak but looked at Ji Tianqing in a daze. She was in a daze for a long time with mixed feelings in her heart. The more time she spent with Ji Tianqing, the more she understood how powerful Ji Tianqing was. She felt that she was getting further and further away from Ji Tianqing. No matter how hard she worked, it was impossible for her to catch up with Ji Tianqing. She would only be left further and further behind. This was because she was not on the same level as Ji Tianqing. A moment later, the head protector said, "Everyone, we will arrive at the ancient gazing platform in 1 day's journey. I hope that everyone can properly regulate their breathing and conserve their energy so that they can perform well at the exchange. Even if no one can obtain the favor of the old man of the ruins of God, I hope that everyone will not weaken the prestige of the divine nations and be defeated by the other divine nations." Ji Tianqing nodded to show that he understood. Then, he walked out of the hall and found an empty room to meditate. Qin Sangqiong, Song Zhanyu, and the others looked at his back and pondered for a long time with complicated expressions before they left. The flying boat streaked across the sky like a stream of light, crossing thousands of mountains and rivers. 1 day later, in the evening, the flying boat finally arrived at its destination. 100 miles ahead, above the endless mountain range, there was a huge stone platform floating in the air. It was a huge rock with a radius of 10 miles. It was beige in color and was not an ordinary rock. Instead, it was some kind of spiritual jade. Although the sky was covered with gray clouds, the light was dim. However, the stone platform was shining with a pure white brilliance, like a bright moon hanging in the sky. On the side of the boulder, 2 ancient black characters were engraved. Ancient Gazing. There was a circle of stone railings on the stone platform. In the middle of the stone platform stood a black stone tablet that was 1,000 feet tall. The entire stone platform looked very mysterious and exuded an ancient and majestic aura. When Ji Tianqing saw the ancient gazing platform, he immediately recalled that there was a similar stone platform in the Eastern Sea's returning ruins. It was called the 9th Heaven Platform. The ancient gazing platform and the 9th Heaven Platform are somewhat similar. I wonder if the two are related. Just as this thought flashed across his mind, the flying boat had already arrived above the ancient gazing platform. Swoosh! There was a flash of light and the great guardian kept the flying boat. He, Ji Tianqing, and the others appeared in the sky. Everyone looked down at the ancient gazing platform and saw that in the southwest corner, there were 6 outstanding experts with extraordinary auras sitting there. Among the 6 people, the leader was a white-haired elder in a purple robe. This person's body was as thin as a bamboo pole. His face was cold and he exuded an intimidating aura. The other 5 experts were all young warriors in the primordial soul realm. There were 3 men and 2 women. The great guardian looked at the white-haired elder and transmitted his voice to Ji Tianqing and the others, that is Guardian Yen from the Heaven and Holy Nation. He is a famous veteran martial sage who has been famous for more than 2,000 years. The other 5 young men are all elite god disciples from the Heaven and Holy Nation. The Heaven and Holy Nation is the closest to the returning ruins, so they are always the first to arrive. Let's go over and say hello to them. Then, everyone landed on the ancient gazing platform. The great guardian led everyone toward Guardian Yen. Guardian Yen, how have you been? The great guardian cupped his hands and greeted Guardian Yen calmly. Ji Tianqing and the others followed suit and greeted in unison, greetings, Guardian Yen. Protector Yen looked at the great protector indifferently. He also clasped his hands and bowed. Greetings. The 5 god disciples from the Heaven and Holy Nation also stood up and greeted the great guardian. Greetings, great guardian. After that, the great guardian and Guardian Yen exchanged some pleasantries. Both of them were secretly observing each other's god's disciples. Ji Tianqing and the god disciples from the Heaven and Holy Nation were sizing each other up, but no one spoke. After a while, Guardian Yen and the Great Guardian finished their greetings and separated. The Great Guardian led Ji Tianqing and the others to the southeast corner of the platform and sat down. On the surface, it seemed that the 12 experts from the 2 holy nations were meditating with their eyes closed. However, in reality, everyone was secretly discussing the god's disciples through telepathy. The Great Guardian's tone was solemn. He transmitted his voice to Ji Tianqing and the others. The Heaven and Holy Nation's strength and heritage have always been the strongest among the 3 holy nations. In the past few thousand years, the peerless geniuses who were qualified to enter the returning ruins were mostly from the Heaven and Holy Nation. This time, the 5 god disciples that Guardian Yen brought are all at the 7th level of the primordial spirit realm. Overall, they are stronger than us. Song Zhanyu added, that's right. I think the god disciples from the Heaven and Holy Nation are all arrogant and cold. 4 of them have reached the 7th level of the primordial spirit realm. The strongest among them, the yellow-robed youth, has also reached the 8th level of the primordial spirit realm. Yin Wuk thought for a while and transmitted his voice, although the people from the Heaven and Holy Nation are very strong, we are only having a martial arts exchange, not an arena competition. If we really want to compare, Mr. Ji is also at the 8th level of the primordial spirit realm. He is much stronger than the people from the Heaven and Holy Nation. Qin Sangqiong and Jiang Ningxue remained silent and did not express their opinions. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, had an indifferent expression and would occasionally glance at the eastern sky. The Great Guardian looked at him and saw that he was absent-minded as if he was waiting for something. He transmitted his voice to him, Tianqing, what do you think? Ji Tianqing shook his head and said indifferently, I don't have any opinions. Since it is an exchange, we should all express our opinions and let nature take its course. If it is an arena competition, it will be much simpler. We will definitely be able to win. Chapter 1666. The Great Guardian, Qin Sangqiong, and the rest understood what Ji Tianqing meant. If it was a martial arts competition in the arena, a fight between real swords and real sabers would be decided based on strength. Ji Tianqing was confident that he could defeat all the gods' disciples from the other 2 holy nations and win glory for the Tai Hao holy nation. Unfortunately, it was not a fight in the arena, but an exchange meeting. For the gods' disciples, it did not matter who won or lost. Even if someone was stronger than others, it was only temporary. There were many coincidental factors. Maybe the person was older and had cultivated for 10 more years, or maybe he had a fortuitous encounter. What would decide everyone's fate and what level they could reach in the future would depend on their talent, aptitude, comprehension, and experience. The gods' disciples who could come to the ancient viewing platform were the top geniuses of their respective holy nations. Therefore, every holy nation exchange meeting focused on communication. The gods' disciples could learn from each other and broaden their horizons. Seeing that Ji Tianqing did not want to say more, the great guardian did not ask further. He said to the rest, "Everyone, sit down and meditate." When the people from the Luoshui holy nation arrive, the exchange meeting will begin. Qin Cangqiong, Song Zhanyu, and the rest nodded silently and closed their eyes to meditate. Ji Tianqing glanced at the 5 Heaven's End disciples and then closed his eyes to rest. In his opinion, although the 5 gods' disciples were outstanding, there was nothing special about them and they were not worth his attention. There was only one thing on his mind. When would the people from the Luoshui holy nation arrive? Would Yunyao come to the ancient viewing platform? Unknowingly, a whole night had passed. The white ancient viewing platform blossomed with white light in the pitch-black night, like a huge pearl. The people from the Tai Hao holy nation and the Heaven's End holy nation were meditating quietly and did not talk to each other. It was not until the next morning when the sun rose that a Heaven's End disciple spoke. "Look, are the people from the Luoshui holy nation here?" The blue-robed young man looked to the east and pointed at a stream of light in the sky. Guardian Yen and the other disciples of Heaven's End opened their eyes and looked at the sky in the east. The great guardian of Dharma, Ji Tianqing, and the others were also awakened. They stopped regulating their breathing and looked up at the sky. An icy blue stream of light sped over from the east. In just 10 breaths of time, the icy blue brilliance arrived above the ancient gazing platform. As the light faded, a 10-meter-long ice-blue flying boat appeared. Under everyone's gaze, the flying boat was put away and disappeared. 6 martial arts experts appeared in the air in front of everyone. Among the 6 powerhouses, the leader was a middle-aged woman in a blue robe with a graceful and luxurious temperament. She looked like she was in her 40s. She had the charm of a 30-year-old woman and the gentleness and kindness of a 50-year-old woman. Behind her stood 5 Essence Soul Realm young geniuses. There were 3 women and 2 young men. Without a doubt, these 5 geniuses were the gods' disciples of the Luoshui divine nation. The people from the vast divine nation and the heaven extinction divine nation were sizing up the middle-aged woman and the 5 god disciples. However, everyone's gazes ultimately landed on a woman in a white dress. It was a woman in her early 20s, wearing a long white dress. She stood beside the middle-aged woman. Obviously, she was the genius with the highest status among the 5 god disciples. Everyone stared at her without blinking. Regardless of whether they were men or women, they were all stunned and their eyes were filled with admiration. This was because the white-dressed girl was too beautiful. What a peerless beauty, a beauty capable of causing the downfall of nations. She wore a white dress embroidered with stars and ripples. Her collar and cuffs were embroidered with gold, which made her look exceptionally exquisite and gorgeous. Her tall and slender figure showed off her perfect curves under her loose white robe. On her fair and charming neck, she wore an icy blue necklace with half a pendant hanging from it. It looked very unique. On her beautiful face, there were perfect facial features. Her thin lips were slightly pursed and her nose was straight. In her clear and deep eyes, there was an indifferent aura that came from her soul. This was a perfect body. Her proportions and facial features had reached the pinnacle of beauty. It was like the masterpiece of the Creator. The people on the ancient viewing platform were the top geniuses of the 2 divine nations. They were all knowledgeable and outstanding. However, no one had ever seen such a perfect woman. Moreover, the white-dressed girl was not only as beautiful as a fairy, but also as calm as the moon and as calm as water. She just stood quietly in the sky. Her expression was calm as she looked down at the ancient viewing platform indifferently. However, there was an air of superiority, nobility, and holiness around her. It was an aura of nobility that came from the inside out, from the bones. It was as if she was an otherworldly fairy from the 9 heavens. She stood quietly in the clouds and looked down at the masses. The people even had an illusion that the white-dressed girl was not a god disciple of the Luoshui divine nation, but a fairy who had descended from the 9 heavens. Her beautiful face and noble aura made the young women present feel ashamed of their inferiority. Although the young women on the platform, including Jiang Ningxue, were all rare beauties. Compared to the white-dressed girl, they were like fireflies compared to the moon. They were not in the same world. The young men stared at the white-dressed girl with sparkling eyes. Their expressions were full of amazement, admiration, and admiration. They could not help but whisper to each other. In the crowd of the heaven and divine nation, an elegant young man said with amazement, "How can there be such a perfect woman? She is like a fairy who has descended from the heavens." Another young man in a blue robe had a look of admiration. He praised sincerely, "In the entire continent, I'm afraid you won't find another woman who is as beautiful as her." The most powerful young man in a yellow robe said in a low voice, "If I can become cultivation partners with this woman, even if you ask me to leave the divine nation and join the Luoshui divine nation, I will not hesitate." The god disciples of the vast divine nation were also secretly discussing. Qin Sangqiong, who was a man of few words, could not help but exclaim, "I've never seen such a perfect woman in my life. I'm afraid you won't see such a beauty in 1,000 years. We are lucky to be able to see her with our own eyes today." Song Zhanyu nodded his head in agreement. Yin Wu Kei had an envious look. He praised, "There are countless beauties in the world, but it's rare to see someone as beautiful as her. Moreover, she has an innate noble and holy aura. She is like a fairy from the 9 heavens. This is a miracle." Jiang Ningxue did not say anything. She pursed her lips and stared at the white-dressed girl. Her eyes were dim. Ji Tianqing was also silent. He looked at the white-dressed girl with a gentle look. "Yao Yao, you really came. We finally reunite on this continent." Chapter 1667. Without a doubt, the beautiful girl in the white dress was Yun Yao. She was not very interested in this kingdom exchange conference. She was only forced to participate because of the divine master's order. Therefore, her mood and expression were very indifferent. She did not take this matter and these people to heart. Even the geniuses on the ancient viewing platform were staring at her with shining eyes. They revealed expressions of surprise, admiration, and infatuation. She was also indifferent. Her heart did not waver. The middle-aged woman in the blue dress could not help but smile when she saw the reactions of the people on the platform. "Yun Yao, for the past year, you have been cultivating in seclusion. You rarely appear in front of everyone. I finally understand the reason. Every time you appear, you can amaze everyone. No matter if it's a man or a woman, they will be stunned." The middle-aged woman's expression was filled with gratification and pride. Yun Yao said indifferently, "Granny Long, you flatter me. In the secular world, appearance is the most important thing. Even the top geniuses of the various kingdoms are no exception. However, there is no place for one's soul. What's the use of having a perfect body?" Yun Yao sighed faintly. There was a hint of loneliness in her calm and indifferent words. The two young women behind her did not understand the meaning of her words. They said with complicated feelings, "Senior Sister Yun, aren't you too modest? Don't you see that those geniuses are all infatuated with you?" Sigh. "Senior Sister Yun, you think that beauty is useless, but we don't. If we can be as beautiful as you, we can make people go crazy wherever we go. We don't care about our souls or where to put them." Yun Yao did not reply. She also did not look back at her two junior sisters. Although she knew that her two junior sisters did not have any bad intentions, she did not want to discuss this matter. After all, they did not understand her past and experience. They would never understand her feelings and views. Granny Long glanced at her two junior sisters and used her eyes to signal them to shut up. Then, she said, "Let's go. We will go down and greet them." As she said that, Granny Long led Yun Yao and the others to the ancient viewing platform. Yun Yao's eyes swept across everyone on the stage, but she did not stop. Suddenly, she caught sight of a familiar figure in the crowd from the vast divine nation. It was a handsome young man in a white robe. He had a refined temperament and was looking at her with gentle eyes. The moment their eyes met, Yun Yao's body stiffened, and her eyes flashed with disbelief. She stood rooted to the ground, unable to believe her eyes. Tianxing. Tianxing. He also came to this continent, and actually came here. Fortunately, Yun Yao had a telepathic connection with him. She was extremely familiar with his soul aura. If that wasn't the case, she would really suspect that the white-robed young man only looked like Ji Tianxing. After coming back to her senses, Yun Yao was overjoyed, and a faint smile flashed in her eyes. When Grandma Long saw her standing there in a daze, she looked puzzled and reminded her telepathically, "Yun Yao, what's wrong with you? Are you alright?" Yun Yao shook her head and replied with telepathic communication, "I'm fine." Grandma Long looked at her with a strange expression. She felt that something was wrong. However, the people from the vast divine nation and the heaven end divine nation were staring at them. She could not tell Yun Yao the details. Swoosh! 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 Grandma Long and the 5 gods' disciples landed on the ancient viewing platform and greeted Guardian Yen and the Great Guardian. Guardian Yen, long time no see. Great Guardian, long time no see. Yun Yao and the other Luoshui gods' disciples also bowed to the 2 great guardians. Everyone greeted each other and exchanged greetings in a calm and indifferent manner. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao stood in their respective groups and did not speak. The two of them looked at each other from a few hundred feet away. Their eyes were filled with relief and surprise. Even though both of them were silent. However, silence spoke louder than words. Everything was conveyed without words. The two of them had a telepathic connection. There was no need for words. They could understand each other's thoughts and emotions with just a look. Not long after, everyone finished their greetings. Guardian Yen, the Great Guardian, and Grandma Long walked to the middle of the ancient viewing platform and stood under the black stone tablet. Guardian Yen was the first to speak. He said in a dignified tone, "All of you are the elite geniuses of each divine nation. You are all outstanding God's disciples who have gone through many rounds of selection. Today is the Divine Nation Exchange Conference that is held once every 20 years. Everyone is gathered here to share their martial arts experience and increase their knowledge and experience." Grandma Long continued, "The purpose of this conference is to exchange ideas and discuss. Everyone can express their opinions and talk freely. You can also have friendly discussions. The 3 of us old men will not interfere in the process of everyone's communication. However, please follow the rules and respect each other. Otherwise, we will have to intervene." The last one to speak was the Great Guardian. He looked around and said in a serious tone, "Everyone knows the rules. This conference will last for 1 day. I hope everyone will cherish this opportunity. If no one has any objections, this conference will start now." After that, the Great Guardian, Guardian Yen, and Grandma Long flew to the sky above the ancient viewing platform. The 3 of them sat in the clouds a few hundred feet above the ground and looked at the gods' disciples silently. The ancient viewing platform fell into silence. The gods' disciples from the 3 divine nations looked at each other and observed. No one stood out, and no one spoke. The atmosphere was a little awkward. After all, it was the first time the 15 gods' disciples had come here. They had no experience. Seeing this, Protector Yen frowned and said in a deep voice, "Since everyone is so reserved, then I'll give you a start. The 3 divine nations dominate the Shinwu continent. Although they use the common language, they have different environments, concepts, cultures, and so on. Huang Qi, introduce our Tianju divine nation to everyone. As Guardian Yen finished speaking, a young man in a yellow robe walked out from the 5 Tianju's disciples. His name was Huang Qi, and he was an 8th-level primordial spirit realm cultivator. He was the number 1 God's disciple from the Tianju divine nation. He was tall and sturdy, and his face was resolute. He exuded a confident and domineering aura. More than 10 God's disciples immediately focused their attention on him. He calmly took 2 steps forward and said in a powerful tone, "Brothers, I am Huang Qi from the Tianju divine nation. I am the number 1 God's disciple. Everyone should know that among the 3 divine nations, our Tianju divine nation's strength and foundation is undeniably number 1. The reason for this might be complicated, and there are many factors. However, in my opinion, the main reason lies in the 2 words, Tianju. As the saying goes, if the heavens want me dead, I will go against the heavens. The warriors of our Tianju divine nation have stubbornness and unwillingness to admit defeat in our bones. We will never give in or give in." Chapter 1668. The martial artists of Tianju God Nation have the qualities of stubbornness, courage, and tenacity. We are even more so when it comes to martial arts. Martial arts cultivation is like sailing against the current. If you don't advance, you will fall behind. The path to becoming an expert will never be smooth. It will be full of obstacles and dangers. However, only the brave and tenacious martial artists can overcome the storm. Huang Qi was very confident. His voice was deep and powerful, very infectious. He talked about the meaning of Tianju and explained the culture of Tianju God Nation and the concept of martial arts. He spoke clearly and logically. The dozens of God disciples listened attentively. Hearing some impassioned words, many of the God disciples nodded in agreement and showed an expression of approval. After Huang Qi finished talking about the spirit and beliefs of Tianju God Nation, he began to talk about the history of Tianju God Nation. He gave an example and mentioned martial god Tianju, one of the 3 God Masters. It was said that martial god Tianju was born with blocked meridians when he was young. He was a good-for-nothing who could not cultivate martial arts. However, he had a different idea. With his strong willpower, he endured the inhumane torture and pain to refine his body. Later, martial god Tianju had another opportunity and received a mysterious martial arts legacy. He tempered his body to the extreme and became the first expert in the continent to reach the spirit cultivation realm without cultivating vital core. After stepping into the spirit cultivation realm, his martial arts path was smooth and his strength increased rapidly. In the end, he only used 1,000 years to become a martial god overlord. The miserable experience in his youth made martial god Tianju cold and ruthless. He worshipped martial arts and the law of the strong being respected. Therefore, after he established Tianju God Nation, he integrated his ideas into the God Nation and passed it on to all the people. Because of this, the martial arts culture of Tianju God Nation was very tough. The strong preyed on the weak and the survival of the fittest. Various forces were good at using iron and blood methods. Approximately 15 minutes later, Huang Qi was finally done with his speech. Taihao and the God disciples of Luoshui had a general understanding of the beliefs and customs of Tianju God Nation. Huang Qi bowed to the crowd and said, "Everyone, my words are just a start. I hope everyone will listen to me and communicate with each other." After saying that, he retreated into the crowd and looked at the many God's disciples arrogantly. The God disciples of the Luoshui God Nation all looked at Yunyao. Obviously, they hoped that Yunyao would step forward. However, Yunyao was indifferent. Her attention was not on this matter at all. Helpless, a young woman beside her could only take the initiative to step forward. "I am Yiqing Luo from the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. Their divine lord was the world-renowned Luoshui martial god. As we all know, the Luoshui martial god is the kindest and most benevolent, and our divine kingdom values friendliness and loyalty the most. It's because martial god Luoshui once inherited the will of the heavens and comprehended the true essence of being virtuous like water. Although Yi Qing Luo was not the number one god apostle of the Luoshui god nation, nor was she the strongest, nor was she the most eloquent god apostle. However, when she talked about the Luoshui divine nation, she was in high spirits and her thoughts were smooth and fluent. Her words were not as hot-blooded and sonorous as Huang Qi's, but they had a different meaning, causing everyone to listen quietly. Half an hour later, Yi Qing Luo finished speaking. Everyone had a general understanding of the Luoshui divine nation's atmosphere, culture, and beliefs from her. Next, it was the vast divine nation's turn. Qin Sangqiong, Song Zhanyu, and the others all looked at Ji Tianqing. However, Ji Tianqing stood where he was in silence. He had no intention of speaking at all. Not only that, he did not really listen to what Huang Qi and Yi Qing Luo had said. He had read tens of thousands of books a long time ago, so he knew the three divine nations very well. Even if he did not listen to what Huang Qi and Yi Qing Luo said, he knew the situation of the two divine nations. Song Zhanyu saw that he was unwilling to speak and was secretly delighted. He quickly took 2 steps forward and bowed to everyone. Brothers and sisters, I am Song Zhanyu from the vast divine nation, ranked 3rd among the god apostles. As everyone knows, the divine lord of the vast divine nation is the benevolent martial god Taihao. What is Taihao? The supreme Taishang, the boundless Haotian. The Taishang is all-encompassing and boundless, while Haotian is the embodiment of the people's hearts and morals. Therefore, martial god Taihao follows the will of the heavens and enlightens millions of people in the divine nation in the name of benevolence and righteousness. All this while, Ji Tianqing had been in the limelight. He had suppressed the geniuses of the vast divine nation until they could not lift their heads. Now that Song Zhanyu had finally seized the opportunity to be in the limelight, of course, he had to perform well. He spoke in a dignified tone about the philosophy and beliefs of the vast divine nation. He exuded a boundless aura of righteousness as if he was representing the heavens and upholding righteousness for the people. His invisible influence made the god apostles on the stage respect him. They nodded their heads and looked at him in a new light. Song Zhanyu was encouraged and eloquently recounted the history of the vast divine nation, listing many incidents. After a full 15 minutes, he finished his narration. He bowed to everyone and returned to the crowd. Qin Sangqiong nodded to him and said, "Very good." Song Zhanyu let out a satisfied smile and thought to himself, Ji Tianqing is acting a little strange today. He doesn't dare to be arrogant anymore. Humph, this is helping me. If there is a chance to perform, I will step forward bravely. It is said that the old man of the divine ruins will secretly observe. If I perform well enough, I will be favored by the old man of the divine ruins. When he thought of this, his heartbeat quickened. Next, a few more god apostles stepped forward and expressed their opinions. The atmosphere on the ancient viewing platform became more and more lively. More than a dozen god apostles expressed their opinions and showed the elegance of the top geniuses. In the sky, Guardian Yen, Granny Long, and the Great Guardian also smiled and nodded their heads in satisfaction. However, Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao did not speak at all. Soon, 4 hours had passed. Everyone was almost done discussing the history of the various divine nations. Thus, the Great Guardian said, "Everyone, this is the end of the first round of discussion. Next, everyone can exchange their thoughts on martial arts and discuss their experiences and opinions on martial arts cultivation." When the Great Guardian's voice fell, Song Zhanyu couldn't wait to stand up and salute everyone with cupped hands. Everyone knows that martial arts cultivation is a process of strengthening oneself and continuously learning about the heavens and earth. Everyone present is at the primordial soul realm and can already control the power of heaven and earth. A long time ago, I had an idea and inspiration in my heart, but I have not been able to realize it. Today, I will share this idea with all of you for discussion. Song Jianyu's words successfully piqued everyone's curiosity. Chapter 1669. Song Jianyu had successfully attracted everyone's attention, and he could not help but smile. He did not keep them in suspense and told them his thoughts directly. Everyone has cultivated a territory and many of them have mastered the 5 elements energy. They have integrated the 5 elements energy into their territories. Other than that, everyone's spiritual territory is similar. There is nothing new or different about it. Only a few experts and geniuses can integrate some formations and secret skills into their territories to increase the power and effect of their territories. Hearing Song Jianyu's words, the god's disciples could not help but nod their heads. That was the truth. Most of the god's disciples' territories had integrated the 5 elements energy. Only a few geniuses, like Ji Tianqing, were able to fuse special powers and sword formations into their domains. Seeing that everyone was curious, Song Jianyu said in a serious tone, "My inspiration and idea is, can we make a more powerful transformation of our territories? For example, integrating our primordial spirit Dharma into our territories? Integrating the various secret skills that we have cultivated into our territories in the form of battle formations? I've looked through many ancient books and information. In the past few thousand years, almost no one has been able to do that. If we can succeed, it will be an unprecedented feat that will leave our names in history." Hearing this, the expressions of the god's disciples changed. They were all shocked. A few god's disciples shook their heads and denied Song Jianyu's idea. This idea is crazy. It can't be realized. That's right. Primordial spirit Dharma and spiritual territory are 2 completely different talents. How can they be integrated? When we reach the tribulation realm in the future, we will only retain our primordial spirit Dharma. Almost no one uses their spiritual territory. Why should we take the risk to transform it? That's right. The power and effect of spiritual territory are far inferior to primordial spirit Dharma. Amidst the crowd's discussion, Huang Qi stepped out of the crowd and said in a firm tone, "Junior brother Song's words do make sense. He's a person with a lot of ideas. Coincidentally, 10 years ago, I had a similar idea. Moreover, after tens of thousands of attempts and training, I've achieved some success." Hearing what Huang Qi said, everyone was shocked and looked at him in disbelief. Even Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao's interest was piqued, and they turned to look at him. Huang Qi was the #1 god disciple of the Heaven-End God Nation. He was also the first person to speak in this exchange. Therefore, everyone had a deep impression of him and paid close attention to him. Now that he opened his mouth, he suppressed Song Jianyu's limelight and won everyone's attention. Even though Song Jianyu was a little depressed, he couldn't help but admire Huang Qi. He asked, "I wonder if senior apprentice brother Huang Qi can demonstrate your so-called in-progress success to everyone?" Huang Qi glanced at him and smiled confidently. He nodded and said, "Of course. Then I'll show my incompetence to everyone so that we can exchange and discuss it together." After saying that, he formed a seal with both hands, and a powerful aura burst out from his body as he began to cast a secret technique. Shwa! A golden light shield with a radius of 1,000 feet appeared on the stage, fluctuating with a vigorous magic power aura. This golden light shield was Huang Qi's spiritual territory. Inside the light shield, there was a majestic power of the 5 elements flowing, and it lit up with a colorful brilliance. Other than that, in the 4 corners of the light shield, there were 4 gigantic array diagrams. Each diagram was complicated and was formed by a few array diagrams, and it looked extremely profound. Huang Qi stood on top of the golden light shield and said proudly, "Everyone, please take a look. This is the spiritual territory that I've released using 20% of my power. I've practiced the flying moon sword skill before, and it has a total of 36 forms. It's very exquisite. I've spent 9 years, and with all my effort and wisdom, I've finally integrated the entire sword skill into the spiritual territory in the form of a sword array. Now that my spiritual territory has been modified, its power has increased by more than 2 times. After saying that, Huang Qi waved his hand to cast a spell, and the spiritual territory began to operate. Suddenly, hundreds of golden sword radiances burst out from the 4 profound array diagrams. Swoosh! More than 300 golden sword radiances danced in the light shield, sometimes forming a formation, sometimes condensing into one to perform an exquisite sword skill. More than 10 god disciples witnessed this scene with their own eyes, and they were all amazed and impressed. Even Guardian Yan, Great Guardian, and Grandmother Long who were in the sky looked pleased and nodded their heads in appreciation. Protector Yan, your country's Huang Qi is truly talented. Not only does he have ideas, but he also has great talent and perseverance. He's a good seedling that's worth nurturing. Without a doubt, Huang Qi's performance was very eye-catching, and many god disciples could not help but admire him. He smiled proudly and said playfully, "Everyone, do you think that junior brother Song's guess is correct just because I've successfully integrated the secret skill with the territory?" No. His guess is very bold, but it's only half right. The secret skill can be integrated with the territory, but the primordial spirit Dharma power definitely can't, and it's not necessary. This is the result that I've come to after tens of thousands of attempts. Huang Qi's tone was full of confidence and certainty. Song Zhanyu thought that Huang Qi was using his actions to support his point of view. However, he did not expect Huang Qi to reject his idea on the spot. This made him even more depressed. However, most of the god disciples who were present agreed with Huang Qi. Even if he wanted to refute, he had no confidence and no evidence. At this moment, Ji Tianqing, who had been silent all this while, suddenly spoke. Junior brother Huang Qi's words are too arbitrary. Even if you fail tens of thousands of times, it doesn't prove anything. Just because you can't do it doesn't mean that it won't work. The sudden voice silenced the crowd. More than a dozen god disciples were shocked and turned to look at Ji Tianqing. Huang Qi's smile disappeared and he frowned as he looked at Ji Tianqing. He asked, "Junior brother, may I know who you are?" Ji Tianqing stepped out of the crowd and walked towards the golden light shield with an imposing manner. "I'm Ji Tianqing, the number 1 god disciple of the vast divine nation." Hearing his words, more than a dozen gods' disciples frowned and started to discuss secretly. He's the number 1 god disciple of the vast divine nation. He didn't even speak in the last round, right? This guy has been unknown all this time. I'm afraid we've misjudged him. What a shocking statement. I wonder if he can argue with Huang Qi. In an instant, the 14 god disciples all stared at Ji Tianqing. Everyone wanted to see what he was going to do. What right and confidence did he have to refute Huang Qi in public? Yin Yao did not speak. Her eyes were filled with anticipation as she stared at Ji Tianqing. Chapter 1670. Huang Qi frowned and looked at Ji Tianqing with a deep gaze. Before this, he had not noticed Ji Tianqing. In the first round of discussion, 3 god disciples from the vast divine nation had spoken, but Ji Tianqing had remained silent. Huang Qi naturally ignored Ji Tianqing. However, after carefully observing Ji Tianqing, he realized that Ji Tianqing had the strength of an 8th-level primordial soul realm cultivator and his aura was extraordinary. Huang Qi's mood and gaze turned solemn. Before Ji Tianqing appeared, his performance was the most outstanding. He was the center of attention and many god disciples agreed with him and admired him. However, Ji Tianqing stepped forward and said something shocking. It was as if he was going against Huang Qi. Huang Qi's halo was immediately suppressed. Everyone's attention shifted to Ji Tianqing. However, Ji Tianqing's strength was extraordinary and he was the top god disciple of the vast divine nation. Huang Qi felt the pressure and saw Ji Tianqing as a strong opponent. He asked, "Junior brother Ji, from what you said, you seem to disagree with my point of view. Do you have any good ideas? Or are you able to integrate the secret skill and primordial soul Dharma form into the territory?" Ji Tianqing walked to the golden light shield and stopped. He said confidently, "You will know later whether I can do it or not. However, what I want to say is that you integrated the sword technique into the territory and increased the power of the territory by more than 2 times. It seems very successful. Your idea is good, but there are some problems with the way you integrated the secret skill and there are a few flaws." Huang Qi frowned when he heard that. He was displeased. Not only did Ji Tianqing steal his limelight, but he also pointed out his flaws in front of everyone. This made him feel rather embarrassed, and he felt somewhat embarrassed. The god disciples from the various nations had agreed and admired him just now. However, after Ji Tianqing's reminder, everyone was a little shaken and decided to wait and see. Huang Qi looked at Ji Tianqing solemnly and said in a low voice, "Junior brother Ji, I've studied it for 9 years and tried tens of thousands of times before I managed to merge the secret skill and territory to this extent. Since you think there's a flaw, then please show me the evidence, not just empty words. Although we're exchanging our experiences in martial arts, we're not talking without thinking. We have to have substance to convince people, don't we?" Ji Tianqing nodded and said with a smile, "You want evidence? It's too simple, I can verify it for everyone right now." As soon as he finished speaking, he silently circulated his magic power and slowly raised his right hand. A dazzling golden light gushed out from his 5 fingers. Junior brother Huang Qi used 20% of his power to create this spiritual domain. My strength is about the same as his, being at the 8th firmament essence soul realm. Then, I can also use 20% of my strength to destroy this domain. Hearing his words, Huang Qi was stunned, and a hint of a smile flashed through his eyes. "Junior brother Ji, aren't you overconfident?" More than 10 gods' disciples from the 3 countries looked interested as they stared at Ji Tianqing. Everyone wanted to see if Ji Tianqing could destroy Huang Qi's spiritual domain. If he couldn't, then it would prove that what he said earlier was just empty talk without any basis. He would be humiliated and become a laughing stock. On the other hand, if he could destroy Huang Qi's spiritual domain, it would prove that what he said made sense. At the thought of this, the god's disciples were filled with anticipation. Even Guardian Yan, Granny Long, and the Great Guardian in the sky were paying close attention to Ji Tianqing. Under everyone's gaze, Ji Tianqing formed a sword with his right hand and drew a mysterious trajectory. At lightning speed, 9 golden sword rays shot out. Swoosh! 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 Each sword ray was 10 feet long. They were dazzling and contained an indestructible power. The 9 sword rays pierced towards different parts of the light shield. They were the flaws that Ji Tianqing had mentioned. Bang! 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 In the next moment, a series of loud noises exploded and reverberated around the ancient viewing platform. The golden sword light completely shattered, turning into a sky full of golden light fragments, bursting out in all directions. 5 holes appeared in the spiritual domain light shield that was 100 feet wide. Dense cracks appeared on it. With a crisp, "Kacha" sound, the entire light shield was torn apart and disintegrated on the spot. Huang Qi's face turned pale when he saw that. He widened his eyes in disbelief and stared at Ji Tianqing. His body stiffened and he stood rooted to the ground. Even though he had seen it with his own eyes, he could not accept this result. The improved spiritual domain that he was most proud of had been easily destroyed by Ji Tianqing. This was unbelievable. More than 10 gods' disciples from the 3 countries were shocked and looked at Ji Tianqing in amazement. After a few seconds of silence, the crowd started to discuss in low voices. Ji Tianqing really did it. This is unbelievable. Yi Qing Luo from the Luoshui Holy Kingdom stared at Ji Tianqing with burning eyes and exclaimed, "If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it." A young man beside her nodded in agreement and said, "Huang Qi's spiritual domain has been improved and its power has been increased by more than 2 times. Ji Tianqing can destroy it so easily. This is enough to prove that the 5 places that Ji Tianqing attacked were the flaws and loopholes of the spiritual domain." The 4 gods' disciples from the Heaven and Holy Kingdom had complicated expressions and were discussing in low voices. How could this be? Could it be that senior brother Huang Qi's spiritual domain really has a few flaws? Ji Tianqing's strength is not inferior to senior brother Huang Qi's. He is a strong opponent for senior brother Huang Qi. The glory and limelight that senior brother Huang Qi obtained with great difficulty has been stolen by Ji Tianqing. Not only were the gods' disciples shocked, but they were also discussing. Even the 3 martial sages in the sky looked at each other and discussed secretly through voice transmission. Granny Long looked at Ji Tianqing with admiration and said, "I didn't expect this inconspicuous kid to have such strength and knowledge. He is not simple." Guardian Yen frowned slightly and said in a playful tone, "Great Guardian, the number 1 god's disciple in your country is really amazing." The Great Guardian stroked his beard and said with a smile, "Guardian Yen, I am not boasting, but Ji Tianqing is not an ordinary genius. He is a demon that only appears once in 1,000 years. Compared to the miracles that he has created in the past, this is not worth discussing." Of course, Guardian Yen did not believe him. However, he could not refute him and could only remain silent. On the other hand, Granny Long's interest was piqued by the Great Guardian's words and she paid more attention to Ji Tianqing. At this moment, Huang Qi came back to his senses. He calmed himself down and looked at Ji Tianqing coldly. He said in a low voice, "Junior brother Ji's strength is indeed extraordinary. It is admirable. You have broken my spiritual domain, which proves that my spiritual domain is not perfect and there is still room for improvement. I am grateful for that. However, you have to prove that you can integrate the secret skill and primordial spirit Dharma power into your spiritual domain. Only then can you refute my words and opinions." Chapter 1671. Huang Qi was very smart. As the number 1 god's disciple of Heaven and God Nation, his martial arts talent and intelligence were top-notch. Even if he was humiliated in front of everyone, he could still keep calm and seize the key point to counterattack Ji Tianqing. So what if Ji Tianqing broke his realm? This only proved that his realm was not perfect and still needed to be improved. His previous statements and views could not be denied or overturned. When Huang Qi's voice rang out and spread across the ancient viewing platform, everyone quieted down. Everyone's eyes were focused on Huang Qi and Ji Tianqing, waiting for a good show. In everyone's eyes, Ji Tianqing and Huang Qi were the 2 most powerful geniuses. The exchange, debate and sparring between them would definitely be the most exciting. Ji Tianqing stood in the middle of the ancient viewing platform and nodded calmly. "I have my reasons for refuting your opinion. I'll now try to see if I can integrate my primordial spirit Dharma power and Dharma power into my realm. As for whether the result will disappoint everyone, I don't know yet." Hearing his words, Huang Qi and the god's disciples had strange expressions on their faces. "What? You're trying now?" Huang Qi frowned and smiled. "Junior brother Ji, aren't you making fun of everyone and wasting your time?" The god's disciples from various countries shook their heads, expressing that they did not understand and secretly laughed. Huang Qi spent 9 years and tried tens of thousands of times to integrate his Dharma power into his realm. Ji Tianqing is trying to integrate his Dharma power and primordial spirit Dharma power into his realm. Yi Qing Luo looked at Ji Tianqing with a strange expression and secretly shook her head. She did not believe it at all. The young god's disciple beside her said confidently, "This is ridiculous. Ji Tianqing will never succeed. Even the number one genius since ancient times wouldn't be able to do it. The god's disciples from heaven and God Nation whispered to each other and shook their heads as they sneered. Senior brother Huang Qi has tried tens of thousands of times and still could not integrate his primordial spirit Dharma power. Ji Tianqing still wants to experiment on the spot. This is simply wishful thinking, a fool's dream. Now it seems that Ji Tianqing's skill is limited to this. He purposely said that it was a last-minute attempt to find an excuse for his impending failure. I thought that he was so confident because he was prepared. I did not expect. Qin Sangqiong and Song Zhanyu of Heaven Vast God Nation were also discussing. Qin Sangqiong shook his head and said expressionlessly, Ji Tianqing will definitely fail. This is too childish. Song Zhanyu smiled and said, just now, I still thought that he could suppress Huang Qi and win honor for Scandinavia. Now it seems that he's about to make a fool of himself in front of everyone and disgrace Scandinavia. You really are measuring the heart of a gentleman with your own mean measure. Yin Wu Kei scolded. At this moment, Ji Tianqing finally cast the spell after a period of contemplation and preparation. He waved both of his palms, unleashing an earth-shattering golden light that scattered on the ancient gazing platform. Shwa! In the blink of an eye, a golden light barrier with a radius of 400 zhang appeared above the ancient gazing platform. This was his divine lightning sword domain. The dark golden light shield was filled with strands of purple lightning. Billions of electric arcs were flowing around it. The light shield exuded a majestic aura that was as heavy as a mountain, as if it could suppress the world. The god disciples could clearly sense the power of the realm, and they were all shocked. This is Ji Tianqing's domain. It's actually the same as Huang Qi. It's also a golden domain, but it's about 4 times bigger. If Ji Tianqing also used 20% of his power, then wouldn't his power be 4 times stronger than Huang Qi's? That's impossible, right? He and Huang Qi are both in the 8th level of the primordial spirit realm. The difference shouldn't be that big. A blue-robed youth from the Heaven and Divine Nation suddenly frowned and exclaimed. Ji Tianqing's realm has the power of lightning? Hearing this, everyone's attention was immediately focused on the dark golden light shield, staring at the dense lightning arcs. Instantly, more than 10 gods' disciples were shocked and exclaimed in surprise. It's the power of lightning. This is unbelievable. Only martial lords who have gone through a few tribulations can control the power of lightning. Ji Tianqing is only in the 8th level of the primordial spirit realm, but he can control lightning. Not only can he control lightning, but he can also merge it into his realm. How powerful! Other than tribulation realm experts, no one can resist the power of lightning. How did Ji Tianqing refine the lightning? The god disciples from the Heaven and Divine Nation and Luoshui Divine Nation were all shocked. Qin Sangqiong, Song Zhanyu, Yin Wuk, Jiang Ningxue, and the others had already seen Ji Tianqing's monstrous means, so they were not surprised. Besides them, Yin Yao was also very calm. She looked at Ji Tianqing gently with a faint smile in her eyes. At the same time, Ji Tianqing pointed at the divine lightning sword realm and said calmly, "This is the divine lightning sword realm that I have used 20% of my power. I have already merged the power of lightning and a few sword formations into the realm." Everyone looked inside the realm and saw that there were indeed thousands of sword lights on the dark golden light wall, which contained the profoundness of the formation. Next, I will merge my primordial spirit Dharma idol into the realm. As Ji Tianqing spoke, he activated his primordial spirit Dharma idol and his body lit up with a golden light. Under everyone's gaze, a dazzling golden sword that was 1,000 feet tall appeared above his head. Swoosh! The ancient golden sword emitted a destructive aura as well as a divine and majestic power as it floated in the air. When everyone saw this, they were shocked and started to discuss. This is Ji Tianqing's primordial spirit Dharma idol. Why is it a giant sword? This is strange. I have seen thousands of primordial spirit Dharma idols, including giants, beasts, and even deities, but I have never seen a giant sword Dharma idol. It seems like Ji Tianqing is an expert in the way of the sword. His sword skills must be superb. Such a special primordial spirit Dharma idol is rare. I wonder if he can merge it into the realm. As everyone was discussing, Ji Tianqing started to cast a spell and controlled the primordial spirit golden sword to enter the realm. Swoosh! Under his precise control, the giant primordial spirit golden sword split into tens of thousands of golden swords and merged into the dark golden light shield. The tens of thousands of golden swords flew smoothly in the light shield without any delay. Chapter 1672. Ji Tianqing stood calmly in the sky without any signs of discomfort. After the divine lightning sword realm merged with the primordial spirit golden sword, there was nothing wrong with it and its power had increased by 4 times. An even more majestic aura emanated from the sword realm and enveloped the entire ancient viewing platform. At that moment, the god's disciples from the 3 holy kingdoms stared at Su Mo in disbelief. Especially Huang Qi, who stared at Su Mo with his mouth agape. He had studied it for a few years and had tried it tens of thousands of times. He knew that it was impossible. How could the primordial spirit Dharma body and the spiritual realm merge together? It was absolutely illogical. However, Ji Tianqing had done it and he had done it so effortlessly. How could he believe it? How could he accept such an outcome? The 3 martial sages in the sky were also surprised and they could not help but exclaim. Granny Long was full of praise and she nodded her head, "Good. Great Guardian, you were right. This kid can really create miracles. This is wonderful." The Great Guardian smiled and stroked his beard. He looked pleased and said, "Actually, I have tried to merge the primordial spirit Dharma body into the spiritual realm but I failed. I did not expect Ji Tianqing to be able to do it. This is definitely a miracle. I can't believe that this kid can really do it." Guardian Yen sighed with a complicated tone and a look of disappointment flashed across his eyes. Ji Tianqing's success had won everyone's admiration. He was extremely glorious and had a halo around him. He had completely overshadowed Huang Qi's glory and he had used his actions to prove that Huang Qi's words were laughable. How could Protector Yen be happy? On the ancient viewing platform, the god's disciples were shocked and they were discussing excitedly. Wu Kei was the most excited and he was cheering happily. He even took the lead to clap for Ji Tianqing. Under his lead, a few god's disciples also clapped and praised Ji Tianqing. All along, the martial world had thought that the spiritual realm and the primordial spirit Dharma body were 2 different things and they could not be merged. Today, Ji Tianqing has succeeded. He created a miracle. The greatest surprise and reward of this year's exchange is that Ji Tianqing has verified something and solved an eternal mystery. That's right. Reality has proven that primordial spirit Dharma idol and divine soul domain can be fused. It's just that most people can't do it. It is our honor to be able to witness the birth of this miracle with our own eyes. The discussions and praises of the crowd continued to resound on the ancient gazing platform. Yun Yao stood quietly in the crowd and gazed at Ji Tianqing with a smile on her face. Her heart was filled with gratification and pride. A star will always shine. Whether it's in the Tianxian continent or in the Shenwu continent where powerhouses gather, Tianqing will always be the most dazzling star. After not seeing him for a year, not only had his strength advanced by leaps and bounds, his temperament, wisdom, and bearing had undergone a complete transformation as well. He'd already grown into a true peerless expert. Throughout the entire Shenwu continent, even the top geniuses of the 3 divine kingdoms were gathered here, but they were all overshadowed by his aura and drowned out by his radiance. This is my husband. These thoughts flashed through Yun Yao's mind, and only happiness and contentment remained in her heart. However, just as the crowd was cheering and discussing, Huang Qi spoke up once again. He was still unwilling to admit defeat, and he spoke in a solemn tone, "Junior brother Ji, you've created a miracle today, and it's truly admirable. However, you were clearly prepared for this. You must have spent many years and tried countless times before you succeeded in fusing your primordial spirit Dharma idol. You actually claimed that this was your first attempt. Isn't that a little dishonest?" Ji Tianqing glanced at him and revealed a playful smile. "I already said that this was my first attempt. It doesn't matter if you believe me or not. Just because you can't do it doesn't mean that others can't. There's always someone better than you. The wonders of the martial path and the vastness of the world far exceed your knowledge and imagination." If he had said these words before, it would have been like an elder educating a junior, and no one would have believed him. But now, when the crowd heard his words, they deeply agreed with him, and many of them secretly nodded. Huang Qi's aura was completely suppressed by Ji Tianqing. He frowned and continued, "All right, we'll take it that this is your first attempt. However, it's still unknown whether your primordial spirit Dharma idol can fuse smoothly with the territory. You've tested my territory just now, and now I'll test yours. This is only fair, isn't it?" Although the crowd felt that it was inappropriate, they were whispering among themselves. Many of them felt that Huang Qi was pestering Ji Tianqing because he was unwilling to admit defeat. To them, it was already a miracle that Ji Tianqing could successfully fuse his primordial spirit Dharma idol and territory on his first attempt. Without going through many trials and fusing, his territory would definitely be unstable, and it would be easily defeated. Huang Qi's actions were not straightforward enough, and the god's disciples were somewhat disappointed. However, Huang Qi's words were reasonable, and no one could refute him. More than 10 god's disciples and 3 martial sages looked at Ji Tianqing silently, waiting for his reply and reaction. Ji Tianqing showed an indifferent expression and nodded, "Of course it's fair, but I have a request." Seeing that Ji Tianqing had agreed, Huang Qi smiled and said, "You don't have to say much. I'll only use 20% of my strength, and I won't take advantage of you." Ji Tianqing shook his head and said calmly, "Even if you use all your strength, you won't be able to break my territory, let alone 20% of your strength. My request is that after you've tested my territory, you can change the way you address me. With your strength, you should address me as Senior Brother Ji." There was an unwritten rule in the martial arts world that people of the same generation would address each other based on their strength. After all, many experts had lived for hundreds of years, and it would be too troublesome to address each other based on their age. Ji Tianqing's intention was straightforward. He wanted Huang Qi to admit that he was more powerful than Ji Tianqing. Huang Qi frowned and anger flashed across his eyes. "Junior brother Ji, you want me to address you as senior brother? That depends on whether you're qualified or not. If your territory is strong enough, then I'll have nothing to say. If your territory can't withstand a single blow, then it proves that your point is just an armchair strategist." After saying that, he did not give Ji Tianqing any chance to speak. He raised his right palm at lightning speed and slapped towards the divine thunder sword territory. A giant golden palm the size of a house appeared, and with an extremely powerful destructive force, it slammed onto the dark golden light shield. Bang! With a deafening explosion, the giant golden palm was shattered into pieces. On the other hand, the dark golden light barrier was completely undamaged. Hundreds of purple lightning arcs erupted from it and blasted towards Huang Qi's head. Bang bang bang! Chapter 1673. Hundreds of lightning arcs wrapped around Huang Qi's body, crackling and flashing. His face was covered in dust and his hair was messy. He was in a sorry state. His dark face was filled with shock, and his eyes were wide open, revealing a look of shock. On the ancient gazing platform, it was quiet. The god's disciples were shocked as they stared at Huang Qi. After a while, the crowd came back to their senses and started to discuss. Some of them even exclaimed, "I didn't expect Ji Tianqing's realm to be unscathed. The facts have proven that Ji Tianqing has succeeded. His realm has merged with his primordial spirit and Dharma power. Sigh. Huang Qi should have just admitted defeat. Why did he have to make such a scene and end up in such a sorry state? Huang Qi's face was cloudy and his eyes were complicated. He stood up slowly and walked towards Ji Tianqing. Although he had failed, his temperament was steady and resolute. He wouldn't feel too much of a sense of defeat, let alone get angry because of it. A man should know when to yield and when to stand tall. He had decided to admit defeat. However, Ji Tianqing glanced at him and said, "I've said that 20% of your strength is not enough. Even if you use all your strength, you won't be able to break my realm." Huang Qi raised his head and a ray of light flashed in his eyes. Hope was rekindled in his heart. All right. That's what you said. He was confident that if he used all his strength, he would be able to break Ji Tianqing's realm. In that case, he would be able to save some face and steal Ji Tianqing's limelight. In a flash, he flew up to the sky and arrived above the divine thunder sword realm. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he took out a black sword and held it firmly with both hands. An earth-shattering aura of Dharma power surged out from his body. He silently accumulated his Dharma power and his combat strength increased rapidly. Soon, he had reached his peak. He wanted to use his strongest strength and the most powerful attack secret skill to break the divine thunder sword realm with one strike. More than 10 gods' disciples could feel Huang Qi's terrifying strength. Their faces turned solemn as they stared at him without blinking. Everyone had to admit that Huang Qi was indeed the #1 genius of heaven and divine nation. His combat strength was terrifyingly strong. However, Ji Tianqing's performance was even more monstrous, and he was very confident and domineering. Everyone was filled with anticipation and couldn't wait to see the results. In the next moment, Huang Qi's aura rose to its peak. He let out a low growl and slashed with his sword with all his might. Sword slaughters the heavenly dragon. He held the sword with both hands and used all his strength to slash out a huge dark golden sword, which fell from the sky towards the divine thunder sword domain. The power of this sword was enough to split mountains and sever rivers and mountain ranges. Even the legendary heavenly dragon would be cut into two by the giant sword. Its power was terrifying to the extreme. The dazzling golden light illuminated the sky for dozens of kilometers, as if a bolt of golden lightning had streaked across the horizon. The fierce and violent sword qi swept across the entire ancient viewing platform, shocking many god disciples. Everyone's hearts were in their throats. They were extremely nervous. Could Ji Tianqing's domain withstand the power of this sword? Boom! The 300-meter-long dark golden greatsword struck the divine thunder sword domain, causing an earth-shattering boom to erupt. Suddenly, the huge sword shattered into thousands of pieces and scattered in the sky. The dark golden divine thunder sword domain also vibrated violently, creating layers of ripples. However, the light shield was still intact. There wasn't even a crack on it. The violent rebounding force, wrapped in thousands of lightning arcs, struck towards Huang Qi. Bam! Huang Qi was drowned by the purple lightning. He was sent flying high into the sky, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this scene, everyone's faces were filled with shock as they let out a series of exclamations. No one would have thought that Huang Qi could not break Ji Tianqing's domain even though he had used all his strength with his ultimate move. However, he was sent flying by the power of the domain. He was injured on the spot and ended up in a pathetic state. This was unbelievable. The truth was that Ji Tianqing's true strength was several times stronger than Huang Qi's. In the sky, Guardian Yan's expression changed. He looked extremely worried. He waved his hand and swept away the lightning arcs that surrounded Huang Qi. He then grabbed Huang Qi in his huge green palm. After the lightning dissipated, Huang Qi's figure appeared. The yellow robe he wore was already charred black and tattered, his clothes tattered and ragged. Under his disheveled hair was a charred face. There were still traces of blood at the corner of his mouth. He was heavily injured. However, he was not unconscious. He was still conscious, but his breathing was a little chaotic. Guardian Yan's face was tense. He released a vast green dermic power and injected it into Huang Qi's body. After a short 10 breaths, Huang Qi's breathing stabilized. His injuries were also much better. Then, a golden light flashed on his body. The charred and tattered yellow robe disappeared and was replaced by a clean and tidy robe. He tidied up his messy hair and cast a spell to remove the black scars on his face. Soon, he was back to normal. "Thank you, Guardian Yan." Huang Qi bowed to Protector Yan and expressed his thanks. Then, he flew back to the ancient viewing platform and walked to Ji Tianqing with a cold expression. "Senior brother Ji, I accept my defeat wholeheartedly." Huang Qi fulfilled his promise. After he finished speaking, he turned around and left expressionlessly. He returned to the crowd of Heaven and God Nation. Even though he had been defeated and even suffered heavy injuries, he was in a very sorry state. However, he didn't get angry, nor did he speak ill of Ji Tianqing. He still maintained the demeanor of a genius expert. As a result, the god's disciples from various countries had a better impression of him. Of course, everyone's attention was on Ji Tianqing. At this moment, Ji Tianqing became the focus of everyone. The god's disciples from various countries were filled with respect and admiration for him. He had created a miracle in front of everyone and used his strength to prove himself. Of course, he would win everyone's respect and admiration. Several young women were looking at him with a strange look in their eyes. Their eyes were sparkling. However, he ignored everyone's strange looks. He quietly withdrew his primordial spirit golden sword and removed the divine thunder sword realm. Then, he walked back to the crowd with a calm expression. From the beginning to the end, he was calm and indifferent. There was no arrogance or pride on his face. It was as if his performance just now was a trivial matter. It was as simple as eating and drinking. This made everyone admire him more and more. They felt that he was unfathomable. The ancient viewing platform quieted down temporarily. Many gods' disciples were paying attention to Ji Tianqing and secretly discussing with each other through voice transmission. The great guardian in the sky saw that the atmosphere was a little awkward. He took the initiative to speak. "Everyone, the second round of the martial arts exchange just now was wonderful. It was an eye-opener for us. Huang Qi and Ji Tianqing were both rare martial arts geniuses in this world. The exchange and learning between the top geniuses benefited everyone a lot. It also allowed everyone to witness the birth of a miracle. No matter what the result is, everyone should be grateful to them. Next, the last round of the exchange will begin. Let me ask everyone, what is the sky?" Chapter 1674. Initially, everyone was still immersed in their excitement. More than 10 god disciples were still discussing the battle between Ji Tianqing and Huang Qi. The miracle that Ji Tianqing had created, as well as his valiant strength, caused everyone to exclaim in admiration. Hearing the great guardian's words, everyone's attention was attracted and they were immediately interested. More than a dozen gods' disciples stopped their discussion and frowned as they pondered. The ancient viewing platform was silent for a few minutes. Many people quietly looked at Ji Tianqing, thinking that he would be the first to perform. After all, he had been in the limelight just now and his demonic performance had suppressed everyone. As long as he opened his mouth to speak, he would definitely be able to subdue the god disciples present with his previous power. However, Ji Tianqing stood there thoughtfully and had no intention of performing. Therefore, some god disciples could not wait any longer. This was the last round of the competition. If they did not perform well, they would not be able to make a name for themselves and would not be able to attract the attention of the old man of the ruins. A young man in a blue robe walked out from Tianju God Nation. He was the second god disciple of Tianzhu God Nation, and his strength was second only to Huang Qi. He walked steadily to the middle of the ancient viewing platform and stood there. After looking around, he said in a serious tone, "I'm Meng Fei, the second god disciple of Tianzhu God Nation. I'm not talented, and my martial arts realm and strength are not as good as Huang Qi and senior brother Ji. However, I've been reading books since I was young, and I especially like to study ancient books. I've read more than 1,000,000 books in my life. I have my own views on the topic of what heaven is, and I'd like to share them with everyone for discussion." Hearing Meng Fei's words, the god's disciples were shocked and they were secretly amazed. 1,000,000 books piled up together was enough to build a palace. Meng Fei had actually read so many books. It was truly shocking and left people speechless. Under everyone's amazed and admiring gazes, Meng Fei said confidently, "What is heaven?" Since ancient times, there have been many ancient idioms in the martial arts world. Go against heaven, heaven's will is hard to go against, change the world, and so on. These idioms had a common characteristic, which was that they contained the meaning of restraint and restraint. Heaven meant the supreme power and law that ruled all races and living beings in the world. No matter what race it was, whether it was living creatures or plants, they were all bound by the heavens and obeyed the heavenly Tao. Therefore, I believe that heaven is an invisible shackle, a powerful restraint and shackle. As for us martial artists, if we want to continuously become stronger, experience a wider world, and reach a higher realm, we have to go against the heavens and face difficulties head-on. Only by breaking through layer after layer of shackles can one be transformed. Meng Fei's words and opinions had their own uniqueness, and they were clear and logical. It contained a strong heaven-end style, which coincided with the philosophy and martial arts atmosphere of the heaven-end divine nation. Some of the disciples of God from various countries agreed with his point of view and listened attentively. However, there were also people who disagreed with his point of view. Soon, 15 minutes passed. After Meng Fei finished explaining his point of view, he cupped his hands and bowed to the crowd before retreating. Shortly after, Yi Qing Luo of the Luo River Divine Country walked to the center of the ancient gazing platform. She was tall and had a valiant aura about her. "I am Yi Qing Luo, and I have some different views on this sacred issue. Everyone, please listen to me. In my opinion, heaven is not an invisible rule and shackle, but a belief that exists in everyone's heart, or rather, an idea. The ancients said that heaven is virtuous, but I think that virtuous people do not go to heaven, but rather, it is what people yearn for. There are many similar sayings, such as the great harmony of the world, compassion for the state of the universe, earth-shattering. In fact, heaven is an illusory existence. How can it have all kinds of emotions and desires? We have all these emotions within ourselves. We have kindness in our hearts, yearn for beauty, and desire more power. Therefore, we entrust this idea and belief to heaven." Yi Qing Luo's words were reasonable, and the disciples of God from the Luo River Divine Nation agreed with her. Even the disciples of God from the other two divine nations thought about it carefully and felt that it made sense. 15 minutes later, after Yi Qing Luo finished speaking, Jiang Ningxue went up the platform again. She also expressed her own thoughts and opinions, which were also approved by the disciples of God. Next, Song Zhanyu, Huang Qi, and a few other disciples of God went up the platform one by one and expressed their own opinions. Everyone expressed their own opinions, from different angles, and used different ways of thinking to interpret heaven in their hearts. Only Ji Tianqing looked indifferent, quietly pondering, and did not show any signs of speaking. The three martial saints in the sky glanced at him from time to time, secretly hoping that he would speak. After all, he was a dazzling genius with his own thoughts and unique views. If he was willing to speak, it would definitely be unique. At the same time, 100 miles north of the ancient viewing platform, in the gray sky, there was an invisible black figure standing quietly in the thick clouds. This figure was tall and burly, shrouded in a wide black robe. Judging from the figure, this person was a man who was 2 meters tall. The wide sleeves of the robe hung by his side, revealing a pair of wide yellow palms, and his skin was as old as tree bark. Obviously, this black-robed man was an elder. The black-robed elder stood silently in the sky, his body covered by the black robe, and his face was also covered by a wide cloak. No one noticed him, and no one could see his true face. Even the 3 martial saints in the sky above the ancient viewing platform could not detect his existence. But in fact, he had already appeared here since the beginning of the Kingdom of God's exchange meeting. He was like an illusory shadow, but also like a god who had merged with heaven and earth, breathing and sharing the same fate. He was the legendary old man of the divine ruins, the guardian of the ancient divine ruins. Although the old man of the divine ruins looked in the direction of the ancient viewing platform, he seemed to be watching the situation there. But in fact, the old face under the cloak was expressionless. His eyes were tightly shut, and he had never opened them. With his vast divine consciousness, which encompassed heaven and earth, he sensed everything on the ancient viewing platform and listened to everyone's voice. Since the beginning of the Kingdom of God's exchange meeting, he knew everything that had happened on the platform and what everyone had said. In the first round of exchange, many disciples of God expressed their opinions, describing the local customs and martial arts concepts of each country. The old man of the divine ruins listened quietly, without any reaction, and did not open his eyes. In the second round of exchange, Ji Tianqing and Huang Qi went head-to-head, debating and exchanging pointers in public. Ji Tianqing even created a miracle and used his strength to prove himself, shocking everyone. The old man of the divine ruins listened quietly, his expression unchanged, and his eyes were tightly shut. Chapter 1675. The last round of the exchange was coming to an end. The 9 gods' disciples from the 3 holy kingdoms had expressed their views and opinions. Everyone looked at things from a different perspective and thought differently. Their conclusions were also very different. However, everyone had something to say and their opinions were quite reasonable. The others agreed with them. At this point, no one stood out to express their opinions. Many gods' disciples all thought that heaven was illusory. It was just that the way it was expressed was different. The ancient viewing platform was quiet for a while. More than 10 gods' disciples were secretly discussing with each other. The third round of the exchange was about to end. The 3 martial sages in the sky were ready to announce the end of the exchange meeting. However, at this moment, Ji Tianqing, who had been silent all this time, finally stepped out of the crowd. When the crowd saw him step out, they immediately stopped discussing and were full of anticipation. Ji Tianqing finally stepped out. I guessed it long ago. With his strength and knowledge, he must have a unique opinion. Previously, he didn't speak on the platform for such a long time. Only now did he step out. Did he think of this at the last minute again? I don't think so. I guess he just wants to be the last to make the final decision. Similar discussions were constantly heard in the crowd. Under everyone's gaze, Ji Tianqing walked to the center of the ancient viewing platform and stood still. He looked around and said calmly, "I'm afraid everyone has guessed wrong this time. I didn't come up with an answer at the last minute." Such a simple sentence caused everyone to smile knowingly, and their moods became much more relaxed. In fact, a long time ago, I've been thinking about this question. In recent years, I've been thinking about this question a lot. What is heaven? Not long ago, I finally had an answer. Now, I'll tell everyone. Ji Tianqing's expression was solemn as he narrated. His tone was low and solemn. Everyone listened attentively, afraid that they would miss out on something important. The corners of Ji Tianqing's mouth curled up into a smile as he continued, "Earlier, everyone unanimously agreed that heaven is illusory in illusory. But I don't think so. In my opinion, heaven is real. As the saying goes, when you are young, follow your father. Therefore, when we are young and ignorant, our father is our sky. When we step onto the path of martial arts and grow and cultivate in our respective countries, the king and emperor will be the sky for all of our people. Now that we have entered the holy lands of the various divine nations, what is the heavens? It's the divine Lord that we believe in. The heavens not only brought about restrictions, and laws, but also a stable environment and the resources needed for growth. But what I have said, is this our heaven? No, that's not it. We are all martial Tao experts. In the future, we will enter the crossing calamity realm and become martial sages. We might even become martial gods. When that time comes, who will be able to restrict and restrain us? Who can bring us greater power? When everyone heard this, they were all surprised or shocked. Many people frowned and looked at Ji Tianqing, whispering to each other. In the eyes of the crowd, Ji Tianqing's words were strange and interpreted from different angles. But wasn't this too down to earth? It wasn't high and mighty at all, and it didn't have that mysterious feeling. More than 10 God's disciples stared at him with complicated expressions, waiting for him to give the final answer. Even the 3 martial sages in the sky looked at him with interest. Ji Tianqing pointed at the sky above his head and said in a serious tone, "What is the real heavens? It is the upper realm that is more powerful and vast than the world we are in. Do you think that the martial god realm is the end of the path of martial arts? That's not it. The end of the path of martial arts is the divine path, and the martial god realm is just the beginning of the divine path. If you want to be immortal and master the power and means of the divine soul, you can only get it by entering the upper realm. The upper realm is our heaven. Who is the one who rules and shackles this world? It is the upper realm. The one who gives life to this world, and who gives education and laws is also the upper realm." When they heard this theory, more than 10 God's disciples widened their eyes in shock. Even the 3 martial sages in the sky changed their expressions on the spot. They furrowed their brows and stared deeply at Ji Tianqing. For a moment, the ancient viewing platform was silent. Everyone was silent, thinking about the meaning of Ji Tianqing's words. Huang Qi thought for a moment and walked out of the crowd. He asked Ji Tianqing, "Senior brother Ji, although your theory is amazing, it is full of loopholes and cannot be trusted. What is the so-called upper realm? There is no conclusion in the world of martial arts, and no one has been there personally. Moreover, how do you know that the upper realm has set the rules and restrictions for us? I think it is the will of the heavens that restricts everything. Including the upper realm that you mentioned, it is also bound and shackled by the will of the heavens. Full of loopholes." Ji Tianqing glanced at him and said with a playful smile, "Then let me tell you. The upper realm is the world where the divine soul lives. The so-called martial god is only a divine soul in this world. The real divine soul is a powerhouse who is above the martial god. They have even more incredible means and power. The powerful divine soul in the upper realm rules many worlds and can set the rules for each world. As for who is binding and shackling the upper realm, it is not something you can guess. Only after becoming a real divine soul can you peek into it." Huang Qi shook his head and sneered, "Even the 3 divine masters could not ascend to the upper realm and know nothing about it. Yet, you are talking nonsense here as if you have been to the upper realm. No one can refute you no matter how you make it up. You are smart." Ji Tianqing looked at him indifferently and said calmly, "The 3 divine masters could not ascend to the upper realm, but it does not mean that no one has been there, and it does not mean that we know nothing about the upper realm. Moreover, why could the 3 divine masters not ascend to the upper realm? You don't even know the real reason, and you dare to argue with me here?" Huang Qi frowned and said without hesitation, "The will of the heavens shackles this world. The 3 divine masters could not surpass the martial god realm, so of course, they could not ascend to the upper realm. If they surpass the martial god realm and reach a higher realm, they can break through the shackles and ascend successfully." Before he could finish, Ji Tianqing smiled disdainfully. "What a joke! The three martial sacred realm experts in the sky frowned as their eyes flickered with disappointment. Seeing Ji Tianqing and Huang Qi debating in front of everyone, and the topic they were discussing was unfathomable, the god's disciples were excited and looked forward to it. Everyone's emotions were stirred and they stared at Ji Tianqing with burning eyes. They wanted to know more secrets. At the same time, in the sky 100 miles away from the ancient viewing platform. Chapter 1676. Under the pitch-black cloak was an old face. On the old bark-like face, there was a pair of dark brown eyes. The eyes were as muddy water, but the pupils were extremely clear and deep, revealing a dark light. It showed the changes of the world, the rise and fall of the sun, the moon, and the stars. It was a pair of extraordinary eyes, containing wisdom and experience that mortals could not imagine. It was like a god in the 9 heavens, calmly looking down at the world. Now, those eyes were staring at Ji Tianqing from afar. A genius who was worthy of the attention of the old man of the ruins had finally appeared. He quietly looked at Ji Tianqing, waiting for him to continue. He also wanted to know how many secrets Ji Tianqing knew. What other shocking words would he say? On the ancient viewing platform. Huang Qi frowned and looked at Ji Tianqing, his eyes containing a touch of shame and anger. Senior brother Ji, since you are so dismissive of my point of view, I would like to know what you have to say. In your opinion, why can't the 3 master gods ascend to the upper realm? The god's disciples on the stage were all looking at Ji Tianqing, waiting for his answer. Ji Tianqing pointed at the sky above his head and said calmly, "This is the most shocking secret on the continent, only a few experts know about it. I believe that not only Huang Qi, but most of the god disciples here also do not know about it. The 3 master gods have reached the martial god realm for thousands of years, why can't they ascend to the upper realm? That's because, in ancient times, the powerful gods in the upper realm had set up a seal to seal this world. This is a world abandoned by the gods. Even the few continents of this world had been separated by the gods and sealed off. For 30,000 years, many geniuses and experts have appeared on this continent, and a few of them have reached the martial god realm. But in the end, those martial gods had no way to ascend and could only waste their time in despair. In the end, they ran out of life and turned into a pile of soil. After all, the martial gods are not immortal, they also have a lifespan of 10,000 years. Hearing this, the god disciples on the ancient viewing platform were all shocked and dumbfounded. Everyone stared at Ji Tianqing with their eyes wide open in disbelief. The ancient gazing platform was silent for a long time before everyone came back to their senses. Immediately, they broke out into enthusiastic exclamations and discussions. "Oh my God! Ji Tianqing's words are simply shocking. How could this be? The world we live in is actually a world abandoned by the gods. Why was it abandoned? What exactly happened in the mysterious ancient times? If what Ji Tianqing said is true, then it's too scary. Even a martial god realm expert will die, unable to ascend to the upper realm forever. Doesn't that mean we have no hope at all?" Many of the god disciples were shocked as they whispered to each other. Among the crowd of heaven absolute god nation. The blue-robed Meng Fei sighed with a complicated expression, "I've always thought that I've read a lot of books and know the world like the back of my hand. But now it seems that I'm too unfamiliar with this world. The history and secrets I know are just the tip of the iceberg." Among the crowd of Luo Shui god nation, Yi Qing Luo, who was dressed in green, looked at Ji Tianqing with great admiration. Her face was filled with shock as she said, "Ji Tianqing's words are too shocking." But the 3 martial sages did not refute or stop him, so what he said is true. I didn't expect that not only is he powerful and talented, but he also has such outstanding experience and knowledge. He knows everything about the ancient times and 30,000 years ago. I really suspect that he has read more than 1,000,000 ancient books. The other disciples of God nodded their heads in agreement. Yes, it's incredible. This is the first time I've heard such words. It's too shocking. We're lucky to have met such a genius like Ji Tianqing at this exchange meeting. Senior Yunyao, why are you so quiet? What do you think of Ji Tianqing? Instantly, the gazes of Yi Qingluo and her three companions all gathered on Yunyao. Yunyao looked the same as before. She looked at Ji Tianqing with a gentle smile in her eyes. Her temperament was very holy and gentle. Hearing this question, the corners of her mouth curled up into a faint smile, and she solemnly said these four words. A peerless genius. Yi Qingluo and her three companions were shocked and started to talk about it. For a long time, no one has been able to catch Senior Yunyao's attention. I didn't expect Ji Tianqing to do it. Even Senior Yunyao thinks that he is a peerless genius. It seems that he must be the most talented genius here. In my opinion, only a genius like Ji Tianqing is qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as Senior Yunyao. Yunyao listened quietly and did not say anything. Her eyes were still fixed on Ji Tianqing. Above the ancient viewing platform, Protector Yan, Granny Long, and the Great Protector all had complicated expressions on their faces as they discussed secretly. Ji Tianqing is so young. How could he know this ancient secret? Great Protector, could it be that your God-sealing mountain deliberately leaked this information? The Great Protector shook his head and said in a serious tone, to be honest, even I am not very clear about this ancient secret. I only know some scattered information. Protector Yan and Granny Long were even more shocked. They looked at Ji Tianqing with more and more complicated expressions. This boy's strength is outstanding, his talent is outstanding, and his knowledge and experience are extraordinary. It's really rare. The Great Protector is right. I also think that this boy is a once-in-a-lifetime genius. This boy's performance is so dazzling. He really suppressed the whole audience and shocked the world. I have never met such a genius in the past 300 years. I wonder if the old man of the ruins will pay attention to him. At this moment, there was another change on the ancient viewing platform. Huang Qi frowned and thought. He recalled Ji Tianqing's words, trying to find a loophole and flaw in it. Suddenly, he thought of something, and a light flashed in his eyes. He quickly asked loudly, Ji Tianqing. You just said that someone has been to the upper realm. So, we are not completely ignorant about the upper realm. Tell us, who is the person who has been to the upper realm? After that, he added, you'd better tell us the specific person. Don't just make up a random person from the ancient times. Otherwise, we won't be able to verify it. The ancient viewing platform immediately quieted down. More than 10 gods' disciples stopped talking and looked at Huang Qi. Huang Qi thought that he had caught Ji Tianqing's flaw and was secretly pleased. However, when he saw everyone's expressions clearly, he realized that a few gods' disciples were looking at him with disdain. Ji Tianqing also looked at him strangely, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Chapter 1677. The atmosphere on the ancient viewing platform became awkward and subtle. The expressions of the dozen or so god apostles were very interesting. A few god apostles who did not know the truth looked at Ji Tianqing doubtfully, waiting for his answer. A few god apostles who had guessed the answer looked at Huang Qi gloatingly, their eyes full of ridicule. Huang Qi felt that something was wrong, but he did not know what the problem was. He was at a loss. In the end, Meng Fei, who was behind him, could not stand it anymore and reminded him. Senior Huang Qi, the person that Ji Tianqing said went to the upper realm is actually a peerless powerhouse that everyone knows. That powerhouse was famous 1,000 years ago, and he had taught the two martial gods, Taihao and Luo Shui. His name is Kenshin. Meng Fei said the answer in a solemn tone, his expression and eyes filled with reverence. A few god apostles who had guessed the answer immediately nodded in agreement and began to discuss. Yes. 1,000 years ago, Kenshin's name spread all over the world. Who didn't know him? Legend has it that not only did Kenshin teach the two master gods, but he also went to the upper realm and became the king of the gods. I've also read about Kenshin's legendary deeds in the history books. I didn't expect Huang Qi to not know about this powerhouse. He's really ignorant. Besides the master gods, Kenshin is the powerhouse that I admire the most. It's a pity that Kenshin fell 1,000 years ago. This is the regret of the entire Shinwu continent. The god apostles who did not know the truth suddenly understood after hearing the discussions and sighs of the crowd. On the other hand, Huang Qi's face instantly turned ghastly pale. His eyes were filled with intense shame. He was so embarrassed that he could not show his face. He did not dare to look at Ji Tianqing's expression and lowered his head in embarrassment. I was too anxious to refute Ji Tianqing's words. I only wanted to find his flaws, but I forgot about such an important powerhouse, Huang Qi muttered to himself, feeling regretful and vexed. Of course, he knew a little about the legends of Kenshin. He had also read about them in ancient books. However, he cared too much about winning or losing and wanted to suppress Ji Tianqing's limelight, so he was not calm and collected enough. At this point, Ji Tianqing didn't even have to say anything. He had already become a laughing stock and was ridiculed by many god disciples. His emotions were complicated, and his cheeks were red and hot. After a while, the crowd's discussion quieted down. Ji Tianqing finally opened his mouth and said calmly, "Huang Qi, jealousy makes people lose their minds. You've gone too far." He pointed out Huang Qi's weakness in front of everyone mercilessly. If it were anyone else, they would have flown into a rage out of humiliation and exploded on the spot. Unexpectedly, Huang Qi was still able to remain calm. He took a deep breath and suppressed his complicated emotions. He slowly raised his head and looked at Ji Tianqing. Then, he actually nodded his head in agreement and said in a sincere tone, "Senior Marshal Brother Ji is right. I was too anxious for success and wasn't calm enough. At the end of the day, it's because my heart isn't strong enough. I still need more training." Senior Marshal Brother Ji's wise words are admirable. I admit defeat. After he finished speaking, Huang Qi turned and walked back into the crowd. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said indifferently, "We were just discussing, not competing. How can there be a winner or loser? I was just sharing the secrets I knew with everyone." The dozen god disciples saw that he was so calm and indifferent. There was no arrogance on his face, and they immediately admired him even more. Even Guardian Yan and Granny Long couldn't find any flaws in him. Ji Tianqing's performance today could be said to be perfect. The dozen god disciples present were drowned in his halo. He was the most dazzling sun in the arena. Everyone was also conquered by his performance. They all believed that he was the most outstanding god disciple in the three divine kingdoms. Moreover, his words about the abandoned world were engraved in everyone's minds. It would definitely spread throughout the entire Shinwu continent in the future. The three martial saints in the sky landed on the ancient gazing platform one after another. The chief guardian said with a dignified expression, "Ji Tianqing has already shared his views. Is there anyone else who wants to discuss or have any questions?" The dozen god disciples were silent, and no one raised any more questions. Granny Long nodded slightly and announced in a solemn tone, "Since no one has any objections, this year's Divine Kingdom exchange will end here." Immediately after, Guardian Yan added, "I believe that after today's exchange meeting, everyone has gained a lot and benefited a lot from it. This is the purpose of this exchange. I hope that everyone can be inspired and become a martial arts powerhouse in the future." The three martial saints had finished speaking, so this year's Divine Kingdom exchange ended here. However, everyone still wanted to continue, and they were still reminiscing about what had happened and discussing it through voice transmissions. No one left the ancient gazing platform. The three martial saints also stood in the field and discussed secretly through voice transmissions. The chief guardian looked at the surrounding sky and frowned, this year's exchange has already ended. Why hasn't the old man of the ruins appeared? Granny Long was also somewhat puzzled and hesitantly said, logically speaking, Ji Tianqing's performance should have attracted the old man of the ruins' attention, right? Guardian Yen shook his head and said, the old man of the ruins hasn't appeared for 300 years. No one knows if he paid attention to today's exchange. Or perhaps Ji Tianqing's performance wasn't outstanding enough for the old man of the ruins to take a fancy to him. The chief guardian quickly shook his head and said with certainty, that's impossible. Ji Tianqing's performance is even more monstrous than the previous geniuses. Granny Long nodded and comforted him, why don't we wait patiently for a while longer? Just as she finished speaking, a rainbow-colored divine light suddenly lit up in the sky above the ancient gazing platform. Whoosh! The rainbow-colored divine light that appeared out of nowhere was dazzling, illuminating the sky for hundreds of kilometers. The divine light shone and exuded a majestic aura that enveloped the entire ancient gazing platform. The 3 martial sages and 15 deities' disciples on the ancient gazing platform were shocked and looked up at the sky. Some of the deities' disciples didn't understand what was going on and looked puzzled. However, the eyes of the chief guardian and Granny Long lit up and their faces were filled with surprise. It's the old man of the ruins. He has finally appeared. In this year's exchange, someone has finally attracted the attention of the old man of the ruins and gained his recognition. It must be Ji Tianqing. It must be his performance that made the old man of the ruins appear. After 300 years, the old man of the ruins has finally appeared again. As the crowd exclaimed, the rainbow-colored divine light in the sky quickly condensed into a huge rainbow-colored light gate. Whoosh! A tall figure in a black robe walked out of the rainbow-colored gate and stood in the sky, looking down at the ancient gazing platform below. No one could see the face of the figure in the black robe. Only an old, dignified, and sacred voice resounded in the sky. Chapter 1678. It was the voice of the old man of God. Although his voice was old, deep, and a little hoarse. However, this voice contained an ancient and sacred aura. Immediately, everyone on the ancient viewing platform bowed respectfully. Greetings, emissary of God. The 3 martial sages led the gods' disciples of the 3 divine kingdoms and bowed respectfully. In the sky, the old man of God waved his sleeves slowly, indicating that everyone was at ease. Only then did the experts and God's disciples straighten their backs and look up at him. The old man of God ignored everyone and looked at Ji Tianqing. He said in a low and majestic voice, Ji Tianqing, you have obtained the right to enter the ruins of God. Now, follow me into the ruins of God. Everyone knew that the old man of God was a martial god expert who could stop the 3 divine masters. With his strength and identity, it was most appropriate for him to call himself God. No one understood why he called himself Old Man. However, that was not important. Everyone's eyes were focused on Ji Tianqing, revealing undisguised envy and jealousy. At this moment, he was the focus of everyone's attention and was also a lucky person who only appeared once in a few hundred years. Everyone knew that after Ji Tianqing entered the ruins of God, he would definitely obtain a great harvest. From now on, his martial arts path would be broader and smoother, and he would definitely become a peerless expert in the future. At the thought of this, Huang Qi, Meng Fei, Qin Sangqiong, Song Zhanyu, and the others were filled with jealousy and their eyes burned with passion. However, something that no one had expected happened. Ji Tianqing bowed to the old man of God in the sky and said calmly, "Thank you for your recognition, emissary of God. Ji Tianqing is very grateful. However, before entering the ruins of God, please give me some time to deal with a private matter." The old man of God was silent. His body did not move and no one could see any changes in his expression. However, everyone could guess that the old man of God was unhappy. After all, the old man of God was as powerful as a god and had an extremely high status. Ji Tianqing didn't follow his orders and even dared to make a request. He really didn't know how to respect his superiors and didn't know when to advance or retreat. The great guardian, Granny Long, and many disciples were worried for Ji Tianqing. They were afraid that he would anger the old man of God and lose the chance to enter the ruins of God. Huang Qihe, Meng Fei, Song Zhanyu, and the others were secretly looking forward to it. They hoped that the old man of the ruins of God would get angry and remove Ji Tianqing's qualifications. However, they were destined to be disappointed. Old Man Godly Ruins was silent for a moment before asking in an indifferent tone, "What private matter do you want to deal with? How long will it take?" Ji Tianqing said solemnly, "Only half an hour is enough. I spent so much effort and went through so many hardships to finally come here, just to see my wife. Now, I've finally reunited with her." When he finished speaking, everyone on the ancient viewing platform was filled with astonishment. The great guardian, Granny Long, Guardian Yan, and the 13 disciples all stared at Ji Tianqing with their mouths agape. They were petrified on the spot. Everyone thought that they had heard wrongly. Some people even thought that Ji Tianqing was talking nonsense. He came to the ancient viewing platform to participate in the Kingdom of God's exchange meeting just to find his wife. What kind of joke was this? Who was his wife? The ancient viewing platform was silent and everyone's expression was very strange. Only Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao, who was in the crowd, looked at each other tenderly, as if there was no one else around. The old man of God in the sky, of course, noticed this scene and said in a low voice, "You only have half an hour. I'll wait for you." The 3 experts and the disciples were suddenly awakened by the old man of God's words. Everyone's expressions were even more interesting. Many of them opened their mouths silently and looked extremely shocked. Oh my God! Ji Tianqing made such a ridiculous request and the old man of God agreed. Is this the privilege of a peerless genius? I still don't understand. Why is Ji Tianqing's wife on the ancient viewing platform? These thoughts flashed through the minds of many disciples. There was also a God disciple with a bigger brain. Suddenly, he showed an expression of realization and said excitedly in a low voice, "I understand. Ji Tianqing is too smart. He must have taken a fancy to a disciple of a goddess and wanted to take this opportunity to confess to her. Oh my God! This brat is simply a genius. With such a confession method, there is absolutely no woman who can refuse." The expressions of the God disciples around him became even more strange when they heard this guy's exclamation. At this moment, Ji Tianqing walked to the middle of the ancient viewing platform and stopped in his tracks. A gentle smile appeared on his handsome face. His deep and bright eyes also showed a gentle look as he looked at the people of the Luoshui kingdom. For many of the disciples present, it was the first time that they had seen him smile. Several young women were captivated by his handsome face and smile, and their heartbeats sped up a bit. Especially the 2 disciples of the goddess of the Luoshui kingdom. Their bodies trembled and their eyes widened in horror. Both of their hearts stopped beating as a thought popped up in their minds. Ji Tianqing can't be trying to confess to me, right? At the thought of this, Yi Qingluo and Lu Xiaomeng's pretty faces turned red and they lowered their heads shyly. Both of them forgot to breathe and their minds went blank. There was only one question left. If Ji Tianqing really confesses to me, should I accept directly or tactfully, or should I reject him? However, Ji Tianqing's gentle voice resounded while the 2 women's hearts were in a mess. "Yao Yao, come here." He looked at Yun Yao tenderly and called out to her with a smile. He even waved at Yun Yao. Yun Yao also looked at him tenderly and nodded at him. Then, she walked towards him with light steps. At that moment, everyone was dumbfounded. The whole place was silent. More than 10 young men widened their eyes in horror and looked at Yun Yao in disbelief. Then, they looked at Ji Tianqing. No one could believe that Ji Tianqing's wife was the beautiful and peerless Yun Yao. A few young men who admired Yun Yao had mixed feelings as they wailed in grief. Ah! Ji Tianqing's wife is actually that devastatingly beautiful fairy. Damn it! Ji Tianqing, this guy, has taken all the benefits and glory. Even his wife is a fairy who descended to the mortal world. Why? The heavens are so unfair. Unparalleled jealousy made a few young men roar in grief and indignation. The few female disciples also had mixed feelings. They felt ashamed of themselves when they saw Yunyao. Especially Yi Qingluo and Lu Xiaomeng. After they came back to their senses, they were so embarrassed that they wanted to find a hole to hide in. Even a fool could see that Ji Tianqing was not confessing to Yunyao. It was not the first time he and Yunyao had met. Their expressions and eyes were full of tenderness and love. The feelings and expressions between them could not be imitated by ordinary couples. Chapter 1679. Under everyone's gaze, Yunyao slowly walked to Ji Tianqing and stood in front of him. If it were any other woman, they would definitely be shy in such a situation. However, Yunyao would not. She looked calm, and her temperament was as holy and pure as ever. She stood face to face with Ji Tianqing. Their eyes met, and there was a strong sense of intimacy and longing in their eyes. Tianqing, I've made you suffer. She took the initiative to reach out her white and tender hands and held Ji Tianqing's palm. Even if Ji Tianqing did not say it, she could guess that Ji Tianqing must have suffered a lot in the past year. He had grown so fast and become so outstanding. He must have experienced a lot of dangers and hardships. Yunyao understood and had always been worried about Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing stared at her, shook his head gently, and said in a sincere tone, "Today, I can see you again. Everything is worth it." Yunyao's body trembled, and the softest part of her heart was touched. Suddenly, she had mixed feelings. She felt sorry for him and blamed herself. If other people heard it, they would not feel much. They would only think that it was a sweet talk between ordinary lovers. However, this simple sentence contained too many twists and turns. Only Ji Tianqing and Yunyao could understand it. The two of them looked at each other affectionately, slowly opened their arms, and hugged each other tightly. They whispered softly, telling each other about their worries and longing. The breath and warmth of each other's breath were the best comfort. At this moment, they only had each other in their eyes and hearts. They ignored everyone on the ancient viewing platform. Invisibly, the atmosphere on the ancient viewing platform became very warm and romantic. Not only did the expressions and eyes of the people change, but even the gray clouds in the sky seemed to dissipate. Granny Long looked at Ji Tianqing and Yunyao with a smile and said with emotion, "I never thought that the husband that Yunyao has been worried and longing for is Ji Tianqing. That's great. She has finally fulfilled her greatest wish and reunited with her husband." Women were often more emotional than men. Even though Granny Long had lived for 2,000 years and had experienced too many ups and downs in her life, she had long become indifferent to life. However, she was also a kind-hearted person. When she was young, she had also suffered from lovesickness because of a relationship. In the end, her lover died. The pain of loving each other but not being able to stay together had tormented her for many years. Now, she witnessed the reunion of Yunyao and Ji Tianqing with her own eyes. Of course, she was touched by the scene and was filled with emotions. She could feel the deep love between Ji Tianqing and Yunyao. She was happy for them and wished them well. The Great Protector nodded in agreement and said with a smile, "In the past, I was still thinking, which woman could be worthy of a monstrous genius like Ji Tianqing? Now, I finally have an answer. Only a beautiful woman like Yunyao would be a good match for Ji Tianqing. These two little fellows are truly a perfect match." Granny Long and the Great Protector were filled with gratification. They were happy for Ji Tianqing and Yunyao. However, Protector Yan's mood was a little complicated. He remained silent and did not say anything. Ji Tianqing was the number one God's disciple in the vast God nation, and Yun Yao was the number one God's disciple in the Luo Shui God nation. And these two people were husband and wife. This was not good news for the Heaven's End God nation. The dozen or so God's disciples gradually calmed down. Seeing Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao hugging each other intimately, many people were envious and wished them well. Everyone could see that Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao's relationship was very deep. They must be a couple who had gone through thick and thin together. A few God's disciples were envious of Yun Yao for having such a monstrous and powerful husband like Ji Tianqing. Many God's disciples were envious of their strong relationship. They were a talented man and a beautiful woman. They were a good match. In their eyes, Ji Tianqing had not only obtained glory and the right to enter the ruins of God, but also had such a beautiful wife like Yun Yao. His life was already perfect. A few people secretly sighed. If they could reach Ji Tianqing's level, they would be satisfied in this life. Soon, 15 minutes passed. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao finally let go of their hands and temporarily separated. Although both of them had a lot to say in their hearts. It was really inconvenient on the ancient viewing platform in front of so many people. The two of them suppressed those words in their hearts and slowly talked about it in the future. Ji Tianqing held Yun Yao's hand and said gently, "Yao Yao, wait for me here. I'll go to the ruins of God and come out to reunite with you." "Okay." Yun Yao nodded and said with concern, "I'll wait for you here. The ruins of God are mysterious. You must be careful. Don't worry. Nothing will happen." Ji Tianqing smiled, then turned around and walked into the sky. He walked in the air and reached 1,000 feet in the sky in 3 steps. He walked to the messenger of the ruins of God. "Thank you, messenger of the ruins of God." He bowed to the messenger of the ruins of God and thanked him. The messenger of the ruins of God nodded silently and turned around to enter the colorful light gate. Ji Tianqing didn't say anything and followed him into the light gate. Swish! A light flashed and Ji Tianqing and the old man of the ruins of God disappeared. Then, the colorful light gate also disappeared and the sky became calm again. The old man of the ruins of God disappeared and the invisible pressure between heaven and earth suddenly disappeared. On the ancient viewing platform, the 3 experts and more than 10 God disciples heaved a sigh of relief. No one wanted to leave. They stayed on the ancient viewing platform and whispered to each other. The mysteriousness and power of the old man of the ruins of God made everyone amazed and curious. Some people were also talking about Ji Tianqing and asking about his background and deeds. Ji Tianqing only saw a light flash in front of his eyes and then he came to another space. He followed behind the old man of the ruins of God and landed on a bleak and gray wasteland. The ground was grayish-brown hard soil and the surrounding dozens of miles was flat and covered with gravel and gravel. There was no green at all. This wasteland was like a huge Gobi desert, filled with a deathly aura. The sky was also gray and covered with thick gray clouds and fog. Even the whistling cold wind couldn't blow away the clouds and fog. The air was cold and there was an invisible divine power in the air, which was quite mysterious. Ji Tianqing always felt that this space was like Kenshin's tomb, a place of death. The old man of the ruins of God walked in front and led him across the wasteland toward a dark mountain range. Ji Tianqing followed behind him and silently observed the surroundings. He thought to himself, is this the real ruins of God? It seems to be in another alternate space. The real ruins of God used to be the world of the gods and now it has become a cemetery for the gods. I wonder where the old man of the ruins of God is taking me. When this thought flashed through his mind, the old man of the ruins of God suddenly spoke. This is the real ruins of God and can also be called the cemetery of the gods. This space is located in the deepest part of the ruins of God and is hidden deep underground. It connects to the sky and the underworld. Chapter 1680. Old Man Godly Ruin's voice was low and solemn, filled with the vicissitudes of life. Ji Tianqing immediately thought of the 9 heavens platform in the depths of the East Sea. He increasingly felt that the 9 heavens platform and the ancient gazing platform were somewhat similar. However, he did not ask about this matter and instead began to casually chat with Old Man Godly Ruins. Senior, the Godly Ruins is the cemetery of the gods. Countless ancient gods are buried here. How many years have you been guarding the Godly Ruins? Old Man Godly Ruins shook his head and said indifferently, "It's been too long." This old man can no longer remember clearly. However, this old man was unable to take the final step and could not escape the end of my lifespan of 10,000 years. Ji Tianqing immediately understood what he meant and guessed that he had been guarding this place for thousands of years, but not more than 10,000 years. The two of them remained silent as they continued to travel through the wasteland. At the end of the wasteland was a pitch-black ancient mountain range. Under the gray sky, the mountain range spanning hundreds of miles was like a sleeping dragon lying on the vast earth. An ancient aura of vicissitudes came from the mountain range. Ji Tianqing guessed that the ancient black mountain range might be the place where the gods were buried. A moment later, Old Man Godly Ruins led him across the wasteland and arrived at the foot of the pitch-black mountain range. Old Man Godly Ruins stopped and looked at the towering mountain range in front of him. He calmly said, "This mountain range is the cemetery of the gods. From ancient times until now, all the gods of this world would leave behind a tomb here after they died." Ji Tianqing immediately frowned, a trace of surprise flashing through his eyes. He did not understand why the gods of this world would leave behind a tomb here after they died. However, he keenly sensed that this cemetery was definitely not simple. It was very likely that it contained a great secret. He raised his head to look at the pitch-black mountain range and saw that on the undulating hills, there were numerous tombs and stone steles. From the foot of the mountain to the top, there were tombs of all sizes. Moreover, the tombs near the foot of the mountain were generally smaller and looked more ordinary. The closer the mausoleum was to the peak of the mountain, the more imposing the construction was, and the taller the stone tablets were. Ji Tianqing noticed this and thought to himself, could it be that the tombs in the mausoleum are also arranged according to strength? The gods near the foot of the mountain are ordinary gods. The closer to the top of the mountain, the more powerful the gods buried there are. Old Man Godly Ruins glanced at him and explained, "Since ancient times, the gods have all been buried in this cemetery. Try climbing this mountain range and see if you can reach the peak." In some of the tombs, there was still the aura of the gods, or the inheritance of the gods. You have to use your heart to sense it. If you are lucky enough, you will have a chance to obtain the power or inheritance of the gods. If you really have no fate with those gods, this old man will give you a red fruit to help you improve your talent and divine soul. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing finally understood. No wonder those geniuses who had entered the ruins of God in the past had all obtained great gains. Many geniuses later became experts whose names shook the continent. He thought for a moment and asked Old Man Godly Ruins, "Senior, may I ask if anyone has reached the peak of the mountain in the past few thousand years?" Old Man Godly Ruins shook his head and said with a lonely expression, "There are only a few tombs at the peak of the mountain, but they are the most powerful gods that have ever appeared in this world. Unfortunately, after several thousand years, no one has reached the peak." Ji Tianqing frowned and asked, could it be that they were not strong enough? Or that they did not grasp any methods or tricks? Old Man Godly Ruins shook his head again and said faintly, "It has nothing to do with strength or methods. The cemetery of the gods is the greatest secret in the world. Even this old man cannot reach the peak of the mountain, let alone see all the tombs. Everything here depends on the word opportunity." Ji Tianqing nodded to show that he understood and cupped his hands to Old Man Godly Ruins to thank him. Old Man Godly Ruins nodded slightly and said, "This old man will wait for you here. You only have one day, go." Ji Tianqing did not say anything else. After nodding, he turned and walked towards the pitch-black mountain range. The terrain at the foot of the mountain was relatively flat, and the closer one got to the peak, the steeper the terrain became. Ji Tianqing had just stepped onto the pitch-black mountain range when he felt a formless, majestic force pressing down from the sky and enveloping him. This formless force was as heavy as a mountain and firmly suppressed him, making it impossible for him to fly. The magic power in his body seemed to have solidified and could not be used. Even moving his feet became somewhat strenuous, and his walking speed was no different from a mortal's. A moment later, he walked a few hundred steps along the foot of the mountain and arrived in front of the nearest tomb. This tomb was only 30 meters wide and was a black mound that was more than 10 meters tall. It was surrounded by a circle of black rocks, and in front of the tomb stood a tombstone that was more than 10 meters tall. Several rows of dark red words were engraved on the black tombstone. Martial god Tianlong came from Shenwu Continent's Frost Empire. He spent his entire life fighting in Shenwu Continent and created the Tianlong Divine Kingdom. He died in the 21,860th year of the Shenwu calendar at the age of 9,852 years old. Chapter 1681. Before coming to the ruins of God, Ji Tianqing had learned about the legends of the ruins of God. From then on, he had an idea. He wanted to enter the ruins of God and see if there were any Kenshin tombs. The old man of the ruins of God had told him that any god that was born in this world would leave behind a tomb after they died. This made him even more determined, and he could not wait to verify it. Rustle. 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 Ji Tianqing lowered his head and hunched his back as he climbed up the mountain with difficulty. Soon, he arrived in front of a black tomb. This tomb was clearly larger than the battle god tombs from before, and its aura was even more ancient and majestic. The black tomb was 100 meters wide and was built from thousands of giant black stones. In front of the tomb, there was not only an altar, but also a tombstone that was 30 meters tall. Ji Tianqing stared at the tombstone and read the rows of gray-white ancient characters. Yu Liumiao came from an ancient clan in the Shenwu continent, the Qianlu clan. He became a god in 3,000 years and ascended to the higher realms, where he was bestowed the title of true god. During the ancient war of the gods, he led the Qianlu clan's martial gods and warriors to fight against the demons. In the end, Yu Liumiao and the 300 warriors of the Qianlu clan all died in the ancient war of the gods. After reading the ancient characters on the tombstone, Ji Tianqing frowned, and his expression became solemn. In his heart, he naturally felt a sense of respect for him. No wonder this tomb can be located halfway up the mountain. It's clearly different from the other battle god tombs. This was an ancient god that surpassed the martial god realm and ascended to the higher realms to become a true god. During the ancient war, this true god led the tribe's people and powerhouses to fight without any regard for their own safety. In the end, all of them died in battle. Such a touching experience is indeed worthy of the respect of the future generations. Ji Tianqing bowed to Yu Liumiao's tomb to express his respect. After all, he had led the humans of the Tianxian continent to fight to the death against the demons' invasion. After a while, Ji Tianqing focused his mind and began to use his heart to sense the tomb. He tried to use his mind to communicate with the tomb of the god of sin. He wanted to see if there were any remnants of Yu Liugao's power or inheritance in the tomb. This was the first time he had attempted to communicate with the tomb of the gods ever since he had entered the mausoleum of the gods. At first, he felt that the tomb of the god of sin was cold and gloomy, and it was filled with the aura of loneliness and death. But a quarter of an hour later, his mind suddenly sensed an obscure fluctuation hidden in the depths of the divine tomb. It was an extremely cold and concealed fluctuation of divine power. Unfortunately, after 30,000 years, that divine power was already very weak. Ji Tianqing sensed for a while and sensed that the divine power was about to dissipate, so he simply gave up. The facts proved that the old man of the divine ruins was right. There were indeed remnants of divine power or divine Tao inheritances in some divine tombs. However, Ji Tianqing did not intend to refine that weak divine power. He left Yu Liugao's tomb and continued to climb to the top of the mountain. Time passed silently. His body became more and more crooked, and his footsteps became more and more staggered. Moving became more and more difficult. However, he relied on his strong willpower to stubbornly hold on. A full 8 hours had passed, but he had only taken 8,000 steps and passed by a dozen or so ancient tombs. Almost all of the tombs had ancient gods buried in them, and they had all ascended to the upper realm. Moreover, these gods all had the titles of True God and Celestial God. Ji Tianqing did not waste any more energy on sensing the tomb of the god of sin. He stared at the grandest tombs on the top of the mountain and slowly climbed closer and closer. The old man of the divine ruins still stood at the base of the mountain. Under the black cloak, his turbid eyes opened and stared at Ji Tianqing's figure. This kid doesn't care about the martial god's tomb or the true god's tomb. He clearly communicated with a true god's tomb before, but he gave up on refining divine power. What does he want to do? Could it be that he already has a goal and wants to reach the summit? The old man of the divine ruins silently muttered, a hint of anticipation flashing through his turbid eyes. In the past 3,000 years, 9 geniuses have entered the divine ruins, but only 2 were able to reach halfway up the mountain. The woman from 2,000 years ago could only come into contact with the true God's tomb and refine the divine power of an ancient true God. This kid Ji Tianqing is even more outstanding than that woman. He can actually come into contact with the true God's tomb. He still wants to climb to the summit, but this old man has guarded the divine ruins for thousands of years, and no one has been able to reach the summit. I don't know if he can create a miracle. Thinking of this, the old man of the divine ruins' eyes became deeper and more dazzling. In the cemetery of the gods, there was a deathly silence. Only Ji Tianqing's panting and heavy footsteps could be heard in the cemetery. A full 12 hours passed. He was about to reach the summit and was still a few dozen steps away from the huge black tomb. At this time, he was almost exhausted and his face was as pale as paper. He was sweating profusely, his clothes and robes drenched, and his hair was a bit messy. Huff. Huff. Huff, he panted violently, lowered his head, and moved his feet towards the tomb. The distance between the two continued to shrink. 80 steps, 70 steps, 60 steps, half an hour later, Ji Tianqing crossed a few hurdles with difficulty and flipped over a protruding rock bush before finally arriving in front of the tomb. This was close to the highest point of the cemetery. Ji Tianqing looked around and saw that there were only 4 divine tombs of this size on the entire mountain peak. There was no doubt that the god buried in this tomb was one of the most powerful gods. However, when he saw the tomb of the gods clearly, he was stunned on the spot. He had originally thought that an ancient god was buried in this tomb and that it had a history of more than 30,000 years. However, upon closer inspection, he discovered that this tomb was not that old, and it did not have an ancient aura. Compared to the tombs of the true gods halfway up the mountain, this tomb seemed very new, and was clearly a tomb from the modern era. A god that can be buried here must be stronger than a sky god. Aside from Kenshin, when did such a powerhouse appear in the Shenwu continent in the past few thousand years? Could this be Kenshin's tomb? Ji Tianqing was full of doubts, but he still felt a trace of anticipation as he looked at the 150-meter-tall stone tablet. There were a few lines of large golden words carved into the tablet. White Dragon, from the Heaven and Divine Nation, was born in the 26,520th year of the Shenwu calendar. The first half of his life was ordinary. In the 28,500th year of the Shenwu calendar, he followed his master, Kenshin, and ascended to the higher realms. 450 years later, he was conferred the title of White Dragon God. 500 years later, he fell in a battle between gods. When Ji Tianqing finished reading the few lines of words, his eyes widened. His face was filled with shock and astonishment. He had never imagined that a god that had fallen 1,000 years ago would be buried in this modern tomb. Chapter 1682. Ji Tianqing stood stiffly in front of the tomb with a complicated expression. After a long silence, he took a deep breath and suppressed the shock in his heart. In his mind, he called out with his divine sense, "Burial of heaven. Wake up quickly, I have something important to ask you." After a while, Burial of Heaven's voice sounded in his mind. "What is it? Have you heard of the White Dragon God?" Ji Tianqing asked in a strange tone. Burial of Heaven was silent for a while, then said with a sudden realization, "Oh, are you talking about Little White?" "What Little White?" Ji Tianqing was stunned for a moment, then he pointed to the huge tombstone and said, "I saw a tomb in the ruins of God, it belonged to the White Dragon God." It was clearly written on the tombstone that the White Dragon God worshipped Kenshin as his master and ascended to the upper realm with Kenshin. He even became the White Dragon God. Hearing this, Burial of Heaven's tone was a little emotional, and he slowly explained, "The White Dragon God is just his title, very few people call him that. Kenshin and I, as well as those people back then, all call him Little White, or Steward Bai." "Steward Bai?" Ji Tianqing frowned again and asked in confusion, "What do you mean? Is he Kenshin's steward?" "Of course." Burial of Heaven said without hesitation. Little White shamelessly pestered Kenshin and insisted on following Kenshin. He even wanted to die to be Kenshin's servant. Later, this kid claimed to be Kenshin's steward, but Kenshin was too lazy to explain and just let him be. Ji Tianqing looked at the tombstone with a stunned face, he couldn't believe the dark golden words. He was truly unable to associate an extremely powerful divine lord with a shameless brat. After a moment of silence, he asked with his divine sense, "Burial of Heaven, can you explain what's going on?" Burial of Heaven thought for a moment and explained, "My memory is a little fragmented, I can't remember many things clearly, I can only remember a little. Back then, Kenshin opened a dojo at Tianzhu Mountain and challenged all the martial saints in the world. One day, a brat who called himself the White Dragon Sword Saint arrogantly barged into the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and wanted to challenge the Sword God. Later on, the Sword God defeated that brat in 2 moves. That brat was subdued by the Sword God's Supreme Sword Tao. He was so shocked that he refused to leave the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. He pestered the Sword God all day long, asking him to take him as his disciple. The Sword God said that he wouldn't accept any disciples, so he shamelessly insisted on being a servant. The Sword God ordered people to chase him down the mountain, and he knelt outside the Sword God's room for 9 days and 9 nights. It really is the remnant soul of the Divine Lord White Dragon. That's great. For a powerful god like him, even if he had fallen, he would still be able to retain a trace of his soul. As long as there is a remnant soul, there is hope for rebirth. Thus, Ji Tianqing did his best to release his mind to wrap around the remnant soul and slowly move it out of the Divine Lord White Dragon's tomb. This process was very slow and difficult. It was extremely taxing on the mind. Ji Tianqing used a full 2 hours to move the remnant soul out of the Divine Lord White Dragon's tomb. Whoosh! A ball of pale white light flew out of the Divine Lord White Dragon's tomb and landed in front of Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's mind was exhausted to the extreme, and his physical strength was almost exhausted. He immediately sat on the ground, panting heavily. Even so, he stared at the ball of white light in front of him with a gratified smile on his face. "White Dragon, oh White Dragon, you are lucky enough to meet me, don't worry, I will find a way to help you rebirth." After saying that, Ji Tianqing rummaged through his space ring for a while and found an exquisite golden jade bottle. This palm-sized jade bottle was one of the gifts Hong Qing Tian gave him. It was called the glazed bottle. Although it was just an empty bottle, it was a powerful tribulation-level magic treasure. It could store magic power, primordial spirit, and all kinds of strange things. Ji Tianqing cast a spell to open the glazed bottle. It released a dense white light and sucked in the remnant soul of the Divine Lord White Dragon. The remnant soul of the Divine Lord White Dragon did not have any consciousness. Of course, it would not resist and was immediately put into the glazed bottle. Chapter 1683. After leaving the White Dragon God's tomb, Ji Tianqing continued to climb to the peak. About 3,000 meters away, there was an equally majestic black tomb. At this point, Ji Tianqing had already reached the peak, and the pressure he was enduring was even more terrifying. His physical strength was already exhausted, and he was constantly overdrawing his potential. His mind was also extremely tired. The formless pressure made it impossible for him to straighten his back, and he could only lower his head and move his feet while drenched in sweat. He would not give up until he saw Kenshin's tomb. After 2 whole hours, he finally managed to walk the distance of 3,000 feet and arrived at the foot of the Divine Mausoleum. The black tomb was 300 meters wide, and it exuded an ancient and majestic aura. Ji Tianqing observed it for a moment and discovered that the soil and rocks of the tomb were covered with traces of time. It was obvious that this was an ancient tomb that had at least 30,000 years of history. On the 150-meter-tall black tombstone, there were a few lines of dark golden ancient words that had long since faded. Ji Tianqing carefully observed them for a long time before he could recognize them. The Seven-Eyed Divine Lord was one of the ancient human sages. He was born in Shenwu continent, and his life is unknown. After the War of the Gods, the Seven-Eyed Divine Lord appeared out of nowhere and used his invincible might to exterminate countless demons, leading the human race to counterattack. In the end, the Seven-Eyed Divine Lord did not hesitate to sacrifice himself and perish together with his enemies. He fell at the end of the War of the Gods. After reading the introduction of the tomb owner, Ji Tianqing's eyes flashed with disappointment. What disappointed him was not the Seven-Eyed Divine Lord's experience, but that this tomb did not belong to Kenshin. He did not waste any time trying to sense the tomb of the Seven-Eyed Divine Lord. After turning around and leaving, he continued to walk towards the peak. There were 2 more tombs on the peak. One was to the right, about 5,000 meters away. The other was in the middle of the peak, about 3,000 meters away. The middle tomb stood at the highest point of the peak, and it was also the tomb that occupied the most space in the mausoleum and had the most sacred and majestic aura. Ji Tianqing pondered for a moment and decided to check out the tomb on the right. It was merely a distance of over 500 feet, but it took him more than an hour to walk. His strength was severely overdrawn. His eyes had already turned black, and he was seeing stars. His breathing was also extremely heavy. Even his thoughts and consciousness started to become muddled and blurry. Shah! 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 Finally, he arrived near the divine tomb. From more than 100 feet away, he raised his head with difficulty and observed the tomb of the god of sin. Gray-brown rocks and hard soil piled up to form this ancient and plain tomb. A vast and boundless aura emanated from the tomb of the god of sin, as if it had brought him back to the ancient times. After a few glances, he was able to determine that this was an ancient tomb with a history of more than 30,000 years. Sure enough, there were a few rows of dark golden ancient characters inscribed on the pitch-black tombstone. Heavenly Wolf Divine Lord, one of the ancient demon sages. He was born in the profound sky continent and died at the end of the Great War of the Gods. When he saw this, Ji Tianqing felt even more disappointed. To think that another ancient god would fall in the Great War of the Gods, he turned to leave the Heavenly Wolf Divine Lord's tomb and looked at the tomb of the god of sin at the highest point of the mountain. Could it be that the most sacred and majestic tomb is the tomb of Kenshin? If that really is the tomb of Kenshin, then what's the difference between it and my Kenshin Yin-Yang tomb? As this thought flashed through his mind, a deep sense of expectation welled up in his heart. He moved his feet with difficulty and inched toward the tomb of the god of sin. The short distance of over 10,000 feet was like an insurmountable moat to him. This section of the road was covered with fine stones, which were formed after the ancient rocks weathered and scattered on the ground. There were also many large rocks and dozens of ravines and holes. Normally, these obstacles would not have affected Ji Tianqing. Even mortals who did not practice martial arts would be able to easily cross it. However, Ji Tianqing's strength was almost exhausted. He was on the verge of unconsciousness and collapse. He almost closed his eyes and staggered as he inched forward. Like a baby who had just learned how to walk, after tripping over a ravine, he found it difficult to stand up and could only continue to crawl forward. When he could no longer crawl, he lay on the ground and rested for a moment. After recovering some strength, he continued to crawl forward. Incomparably tenacious willpower tenaciously supported him. He clenched his teeth and refused to give up. At the foot of the mountain, the old man of sin quietly watched all of this. At the beginning, when he saw Ji Tianqing reach the summit, he was rather gratified and excited. After all, Ji Tianqing had created a miracle and successfully reached the summit. He had reached a height that no one had reached in thousands of years. The old man of sin was also looking forward to seeing what Ji Tianqing would gain. But now, Ji Tianqing had exhausted all his strength and was on the verge of collapse and unconsciousness. But he was still tenaciously holding on. Even if he had to crawl, he still had to slowly climb to the summit. Chapter 1684. Ji Tianqing looked up at the pitch-black tombstone as his expression and gaze became extremely mixed. He had never imagined that this divine tomb that stood at the peak of the mountain, the head of all gods, was actually the tomb of God King Nacre Light. It's actually not Kenshin's tomb. Kenshin was once conferred the title of God King, ruling over tens of thousands of gods. After his death, the tomb should have appeared here. But I've seen countless tombs from the foot of the mountain, but I haven't found Kenshin's tomb. What's going on here? Ji Tianqing was filled with questions, unable to understand why. However, he also understood that it was only natural that God King Nacre Light's tomb stood at the peak of the mountain and was revered as the head of all gods. After all, not only was Nacre Light the ruler of all gods, but she was also the founder of this world's civilization. Without Nacre Light's teachings and protection, who knew when the living beings of this world would gain intelligence and grasp cultivation methods? Nacre Light's contributions to this world were definitely the greatest since ancient times. After a moment of thought, Ji Tianqing roused himself and did his best to release his consciousness as he probed the Nacre Light divine tomb. He really wanted to know if Nacre Light's tomb contained any divine power or divine legacy. Nacre Light was the legendary goddess Nacre Light, known as the ruler and creator of this world. Now that goddess Nacre Light's tomb was at the peak of the mausoleum, it meant that goddess Nacre Light had indeed died. However, Yinyao had fused with the Neptunian divine pearl and become Nacre Light's reincarnation. Ji Tianqing calculated that if he could obtain goddess Nacre Light's divine power or legacy, it would definitely be extremely beneficial to Yinyao. His consciousness entered the divine tomb bit by bit, exploring deeper into the divine tomb. A full 30 minutes passed, but he did not discover anything. He did not sense any presence of divine power. Is it because too much time has passed? Even if goddess Nacre Light left behind her divine power and legacy, it has dissipated over the years. Ji Tianqing thought in doubt as he continued probing, unwilling to give up. As time passed, his consciousness became more and more blurry as he became mentally exhausted. An hour later, he finally detected a very obscure divine power aura hidden in the depths of the divine tomb. His heart was filled with joy, and he recklessly probed that aura. However, before he could find out what the aura was, he blacked out and fainted. At this point, he was already at the end of his rope. All of his strength and mind had been overdrawn. He collapsed powerlessly and slowly fell to the ground, falling unconscious. At the foot of the mountain, Old Man Godly Ruins was watching him. Seeing him fall unconscious on the ground, Old Man Godly Ruins waved his hand and shot out a dazzling golden light. Shwa! The golden light condensed into a giant palm that wrapped around Ji Tianqing and dragged him back to the front of Old Man God. Old Man Godly Ruins held up Ji Tianqing with one hand and murmured with a complicated expression, "I didn't think that this kid would create a miracle that hasn't happened in thousands of years." He was able to climb to the top of the mountain and reach the tomb of the King of Gods. Unfortunately, the one-day time limit is up. With that, Old Man Godly Ruins carried Ji Tianqing and turned to leave the cemetery of the gods. He stepped on the void, crossed the dark sky, and returned the way he came. During this process, boundless azure with divine power surged out of his palm and poured into Ji Tianqing's body. The rich azure light contained an incomparably sacred and powerful power. After a short 100 breaths, the azure with divine power filled Ji Tianqing's body and healed his magic power and injuries. Originally, Ji Tianqing had exhausted his strength and overdrawn his potential and mind. He would have been unconscious for 2 or 3 months, and his body and soul would have suffered indelible injuries, which would have affected his martial arts foundation and talent. However, after being repaired by the azure with divine power, not only did he recover, his strength also quietly increased. Old Man Godly Ruins stood in the sky above the wasteland and let go of Ji Tianqing. About half a quarter of an hour later, Ji Tianqing slowly woke up. Huff, he let out a long breath and gradually opened his eyes. Waves of exhaustion and weakness came from his body and soul, making him lie in the air and not want to move. This was the after effect of overdrawing his strength and mind, and it would take some time to subside. Ji Tianqing saw Old Man Godly Ruins in front of him and found himself floating in the sky above the wasteland. He slowly stood up. He turned his head to look at the mountain range at the end of the wasteland and awkwardly asked Old Man Godly Ruins, "Senior, is it time?" Old Man Godly Ruins nodded slightly. Ji Tianqing revealed a regretful expression and a trace of disappointment flashed through his eyes. "I have already checked the divine power in Goddess Yaoguang's tomb, but unfortunately, I fainted before I could check it out." He thought to himself that if he had the chance in the future, he would definitely come again. After all, the divine power or inheritance left behind by Goddess Yaoguang was too important to Yun Yao. He sighed with melancholy and bowed to Old Man Godly Ruins. He said in a sincere tone, "Thank you for saving me, Senior." Old Man Godly Ruins nodded and didn't say anything. He waved his hand and sent out a white light. The white light condensed into a huge door of light that floated in the sky. Old Man Godly Ruins looked at Ji Tianqing and calmly said, "Little guy, since you know that this is an abandoned world, you should have a certain understanding of ancient legends. This old man wants to know what you will do if you can reach the martial god realm in the future." Ji Tianqing didn't know why Old Man Godly Ruins asked this. But he replied without hesitation, "Naturally, I will investigate the ancient matters and do my best to find a way to break through the seal of the world." Old Man Godly Ruins calmly nodded and said, "This old man looks forward to the next time I see you, to what extent you will have grown. Follow your heart and do your best to pursue the peak of the martial path. Go." With that, he waved his hand at Ji Tianqing. "Senior, wait a moment." Ji Tianqing didn't want to leave and unwillingly asked, "Senior, I have a question and I hope you can answer it for me." "What is it?" Old Man Godly Ruins looked at him and asked in a low voice. Ji Tianqing frowned and said, "I believe you also know that 1,000 years ago, the famous Kenshin fell. Kenshin came from this world and ascended to the upper realm to become a divine king. Logically speaking, after Kenshin fell, a tomb should have appeared here and it should have been on the mountain peak. But I didn't find Kenshin's tomb on the mountain peak." Old Man Godly Ruins fell silent. After a long while, he said faintly, "If the sword god has fallen, then his tomb will definitely appear on the peak of the mountain. Since it's not on the mountain peak, it means, he might not have really fallen." With that, Old Man Godly Ruins turned and flew toward the cemetery of the gods. Ji Tianqing stood in the air and frowned in confusion as he watched Old Man Godly Ruins disappear. Kenshin didn't really fall. What does that mean? Chapter 1685. Swoosh! With a flash of light, Ji Tianqing's figure disappeared and left the ruins of God. The next moment, light returned to his eyes and he was back on the ancient viewing platform. Around the ancient viewing platform, the gods' disciples of the three divine kingdoms had not left yet. They were divided into three groups and were discussing something in a low voice. Seeing Ji Tianqing suddenly appear, everyone stopped talking and looked at him in unison. Ji Tianqing is out. The one-day deadline is finally up. He really came out. I wonder what Ji Tianqing has found after entering the ruins of God. Everyone stared at Ji Tianqing expectantly and observed his changes. However, after the god's disciples checked his strength, they were a little disappointed and confused. Strange, Ji Tianqing doesn't seem to have changed. Did he not find anything in the ruins of God? Since ancient times, there have been many geniuses who have entered the ruins of God, but not everyone has found anything. Many people have returned empty-handed. If that's the case, then we have waited for nothing. On the surface, Ji Tianqing did not seem to have changed. The greenwood divine power that the old man of God had transferred to him was hidden in his limbs and bones, silently nourishing and strengthening his body. With the strength of the god's disciples, they could not see the hidden divine power at all. Only the great guardian, Guardian Yan, and Granny Long could see the clues. Moreover, the three experts knew very well that Ji Tianqing most likely had found something and would not return empty-handed. However, what he had found might be divine power, divine Tao inheritance, or divine artifacts and Dharma treasures. These were all things that could not be seen at the moment. Ji Tianqing ignored the attention and discussion of the god's disciples and walked toward Yunyao. Yunyao stood quietly in the crowd and looked at Ji Tianqing gently. When Ji Tianqing stood in front of her, Yi Qingluo, Lu Xiaomeng and the two young men all tactfully retreated. Ji Tianqing looked at Yunyao and said with a smile, "Yao Yao, I'm back. Now that the matter is settled, I can finally talk to you properly. It's good that you're safe." Yunyao looked him up and down a few times. Seeing that he was unharmed, she was relieved. "Tianqing, did you gain anything from entering the ruins of God?" Ji Tianqing nodded and said with a complicated expression, "Of course there are gains, and they are very special. But we'll talk about this later. Now, I want to discuss something with you." Yunyao nodded slightly and said gently, "Okay, go ahead." Ji Tianqing used a secret sound transmission technique and said to her, "I'm now the #1 god's disciple in the vast God nation, but you're cultivating in the Luo Shui God nation. We're separated by the entire Heaven's End God nation. It wasn't easy for me to find you and finally reunite with you. I don't want to be separated from you again." Yunyao nodded and said, "Me too." Ji Tianqing smiled and asked, "Yao Yao, are you willing to leave the Luo Shui God nation and accompany me?" "Of course I am." Yunyao nodded without hesitation, but explained with a complicated expression, "But I can't leave the Luo Shui God nation yet." "Why?" Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and asked with concern, "Did the Luo Shui martial god restrict you in some way?" "That's not it." Yunyao shook her head and said with a complicated expression, "The Luo Shui martial god has treated me well. Moreover, it's more helpful for my cultivation if I stay in the Luo Shui God nation. In the past year, I was able to increase my strength rapidly because I awakened my talent and potential. In my mind, the memories of Goddess Yaoguang often appear." Ji Tianqing roughly understood what she meant and nodded. "In that case, it's better for you to stay in the Luo Shui God nation. What about you?" Yunyao looked worried and asked, "You're going back to the vast God nation. When can we meet again?" Ji Tianqing smiled and reached out to hold her hand. He said gently, "I'm not going back to the vast God nation. I'm going to the Luo Shui God nation with you. People say that the people of the Luo Shui God nation are the kindest. I don't think the Luo Shui God nation will reject me, right?" Yunyao was stunned for a moment, and a look of disbelief appeared on her face. She asked in surprise, Tianqing, are you really going to follow me to the Luoshui God Nation? But how will you explain to the vast God Nation? You're the number one God disciple. Will Martial God Taihao allow you to leave? Ji Tianqing shook his head and comforted her, don't worry. Before I came to the ruins of God, I've already talked to Martial God Taihao. He has already agreed. Yun Yao was relieved and nodded, in that case, there shouldn't be a problem. It's just that you're the number one God disciple in the vast God nation and enjoy the best resources and treatment. I'm afraid that you'll be wronged when you return to the Luoshui God nation with me. Before she could finish, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said confidently, with my talent and strength, how could I be wronged? That's true. Yun Yao nodded as a proud smile appeared in her eyes. At this moment, Guardian Yen cupped his hands and bowed to Granny Long and the Great Guardian. The 5 God disciples of the Heaven End God Nation were also ready, following behind Guardian Yen. Under everyone's gaze, Guardian Yen took out a flying boat. He brought the 5 Gods disciples into the flying ship and flew into the sky at lightning speed. Soon, they were far away. After the people of the Heaven End God Nation left, the Great Guardian also said goodbye to Granny Long. Then, he looked at Ji Tianqing and said loudly, Tianqing, we should go back. Qin Sangqiong, Song Zhanyu, Wuk Yin and Jiang Ningxue all stood behind the Great Guardian and looked at Ji Tianqing quietly. Ji Tianqing turned his head and looked at everyone. He hesitated and didn't say anything. Yun Yao held his hand and said gently, Tianqing, since you've already made your decision, go and say goodbye to them. Okay, wait for me here. Ji Tianqing nodded and walked towards the Great Guardian. When he came in front of the Great Guardian, he said apologetically, Great Guardian, I'm sorry. I'm afraid I can't go back to Mount God Bestowment with you. Qin Sangqiong, Wuk Yin and the others were stunned. They couldn't believe it. The Great Guardian seemed to have expected this and wasn't surprised. Tianqing, are you really going to Luoshui God Nation to be with your wife? Ji Tianqing nodded and said, when I first entered Mount God Bestowment, I was looking for her. Now that my wish has been fulfilled, of course, I'll stay with her forever. Sigh. The Great Guardian sighed and said, Tianqing, I know you're a man of character and you're loyal to your feelings. However, you're the number one God disciple of the vast God nation and the son of God that the God Master values the most. If you go to Luoshui God nation, you'll lose the glory and treatment you had before. It might affect your future martial arts. Ji Tianqing smiled and said calmly, thank you for your concern, Great Guardian. However, I've already made up my mind. You don't have to persuade me anymore. To me, it doesn't matter where I cultivate. My martial arts future is in my own hands and I don't need to rely on external resources. My wife is my most precious other half. As long as I can be with her and protect her day and night, nothing else matters. Hearing his words, the Great Guardian, Qin Sangqiong, Song Zhanyu and the others fell silent. Everyone's expression was very complicated. They sighed for him, but at the same time, they admired him. Chapter 1686. It was only today that Jiang Ningxue realized how devoted Ji Tianqing was to his love. At this moment, she was extremely envious of Yun Yao. She was able to receive all of Ji Tianqing's love, and he was so loyal to her. This was the kind of love that Jiang Ningxue had always dreamed of. A couple for life. Together, they will live and prosper together. Perhaps, only a goddess like Yun Yao is worthy of Ji Tianqing's heart. Jiang Ningxue sighed with bitterness in her heart. The Great Guardian, Song Zhanyu, and the others all looked at Ji Tianqing with complicated expressions. They did not know what to say. Qin Sangqiong, on the other hand, was very carefree. He cupped his fists towards Ji Tianqing and smiled. Senior brother Ji, I admire your devotion. However, if you leave like this and give me the position of the first God's disciple, will you be unhappy? This was the first time he called Ji Tianqing senior brother. This showed that he admired Ji Tianqing from the bottom of his heart. Ji Tianqing smiled and shook his head. I am just a passerby. You are the best candidate for the position of the first God's disciple. Wu Kei looked at him with reluctance. He cupped his fists and said, Young Master Ji, Wu Kei will never forget the help you gave me back then. Since you have made up your mind, Wu Kei will not try to persuade you anymore. I only hope that you will be able to live a peaceful life with Miss Yunyao after you go to the Luotian God Kingdom. Ji Tianqing smiled and nodded. He reminded him, I will only be leaving for a short period of time. Perhaps after many years, I will return to Mount God Bestowment. You have to cultivate diligently. If I see you again in the future and you are too weak, don't tell me that you know me. Wu Kei smiled and shook his head. Don't worry, young Master Ji. With your words, I will cultivate diligently even if I have to risk my life. I look forward to the day we meet again. When that day comes, I will tell you a secret. What secret? Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and looked at him with interest. A playful smile appeared on Wu Kei's face. He pretended to be mysterious. Of course, I cannot tell you now. I will tell you when we meet again. All right. Ji Tianqing smiled helplessly. He nodded and said, let's talk about it in the future then. After he finished speaking, he cupped his hands at the Great Guardian and said, Great Guardian, I'll take my leave now. The Great Guardian nodded and said Ji Tianji to be Tianji. Ji Tianqing stopped and turned around to look at her. He asked calmly, Miss Jiang, what's the matter? Jiang Ningxue looked at him with a complicated look in her eyes. She said with a bitter tone, You're leaving, but you won't even say goodbye to me? Oh. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, Miss Jiang, then I'll take my leave. Jiang Ningxue was a bit embarrassed, but she still summoned her courage and said, Wait. Young Master Ji, don't you have anything else to say to me? Ji Tianqing stared at her for a moment before he sternly said, You are a beautiful woman, but you are associated with lowly people. If this goes on for a long time, you will certainly hurt yourself. It will be too late to regret. Jiang Ningxue hurriedly explained, Young Master Ji, I know you're still hung up over what happened back then, but I've already made up my mind to never associate with that person again. That's good, Ji Tianqing nodded and said sincerely, You're such a beautiful woman, why do you care about me? If you meet a man you like in the future, just marry him. A bitter smile flashed across Jiang Ningxue's eyes. She murmured in a low voice, If I didn't meet you, it might be possible. But now that I've met you, why would I like another man? Ji Tianqing frowned and said apologetically, I'm sorry, I can't help you with this. Miss Jiang, please use your time to clear your memories. After a long time, when your memories fade away, you'll let it go. My wife is still waiting for me. Goodbye. Then, he turned around and left without looking back. Jiang Ningxue looked at his back sadly. She smiled bitterly inside in her heart, Once I meet Tianqing, I'll miss him forever. Once I don't meet him, I'll miss him forever. Qin Sangxiong, Song Zhanyu, and Wuk Yin were secretly sizing her up and shaking their heads. Only now did they realize that Jiang Ningxue had already fallen deeply in love with Ji Tianqing. But who could say for sure when it came to love? The Great Guardian did not feel anything. He calmly took out his flying boat. All right, it's time for us to go. Then, he led Song Zhanyu, Jiang Ningxue, and the others into the flying boat and flew up into the sky. After the Great Guardian and the others left, only Ji Tianqing and the 6 people from the Luoshui God Nation were left on the ancient viewing platform. When Ji Tianqing returned to Yunyao, Yunyao had just finished talking with Grandma Long. She smiled and walked up to Ji Tianqing, holding his arm naturally. Then, she walked up to Grandma Long and introduced them. Tianqing, this is Grandma Long, the Great Guardian of the Luoshui God Mountain. Grandma Long, this is Ji, before Yunyao could finish, Grandma Long interrupted her. She smiled happily and said, "There's no need for introductions. I already know that Ji Tianqing is your husband." Grandma Long had a kind look on her face. Her smile was especially happy and gratified. She looked at Ji Tianqing with sparkling eyes as if she had seen a rare treasure. Ji Tianqing cupped his hands and said calmly, "Junior Ji Tianqing greets Grandma Long. What do you think?" "Of course I agree." Grandma Long smiled and nodded. She said confidently, "Kid, I'm more than happy that you're willing to come to our Luoshui God Nation." Sigh, I didn't expect such a surprise to come so suddenly. Just now, I was envious of the great guardian. I didn't expect the vast God Nation to have such a monstrous genius like you. I didn't expect that in the blink of an eye, you would become the son-in-law of our Luoshui God Nation. This is too surprising. Although I haven't reported this matter to the Divine Lord, I can still make the decision to agree. Tianqing, don't worry, I will take care of you like how I take care of Yunyao in the future. Grandma Long was very emotional. She said so much in one breath, as if she was afraid that Ji Tianqing would go back on his word. Yi Qing Luo, Lu Xiaomeng, and the others were dumbfounded as they listened. They looked at Ji Tianqing in disbelief. After a while, when they came back to their senses, they exclaimed in disbelief. "Oh my God! Ji Tianqing, you want to join our Luoshui God Nation? I can't believe it. You gave up the glory and identity of the #1 God's disciple for love. So this is the power of love. I believe in love again." The two young men were still calm. Yi Qing Luo and Lu Xiaomeng were extremely emotional. It took them a while to calm down. Grandma Long and Ji Tianqing chatted for a while and then introduced a few God's disciples to him so that they could get to know each other. "This is Ji Tianqing, Yunyao's husband. I don't think I need to introduce him, right? From today onwards, Yunyao is your big senior sister and Ji Tianqing is your big senior brother. Tianqing, this is Yi Qing Luo and this is Lu Xiaomeng, this is Zhou Bin and this is Wen Renyu." Chapter 1687. An ice-blue flying boat sped across the sky towards the east. The airship was 100 feet long and it was very spacious. There was a spacious hall with a dozen rooms and secret rooms. At that moment, Granny Long, Ji Tianqing, Yunyao, and the rest were gathered in the luxurious hall. The floor of the hall was paved with spiritual jade and the surrounding walls were inlaid with gemstone lamps that shone brightly. Granny Long sat in the main seat while Ji Tianqing, Yunyao, and Yi Qing Luo sat on the left side of the hall. Lu Xiaomeng, Zhou Bin, and Wen Renyu sat on the right side. Ji Tianqing had a preliminary understanding of the few God's disciples through the previous introduction and the short contact they had. Among the 5 God disciples, Yunyao was the strongest. She had reached the 7th level of the primordial soul realm and was everyone's eldest senior sister. Apart from her, the other 4 God disciples had reached the 6th level of the primordial soul realm. Yi Qing Luo, who was ranked 2nd, was tall and wore a green dress. Her face was fair and delicate, and she had a virtuous and elegant temperament. Zhou Bin, who was ranked 3rd, was a tall and elegant young master. He was a man of few words and seemed to be shrewd and insightful. Wen Renyu, who was ranked 4th, wore a white robe. He was thin and handsome. He had a kind face and was more extroverted. However, he had a noble aura that was unique to ancient clans. As for Lu Xiaomeng, who was ranked 5th, she was a petite girl with a cute face. 2 small dimples appeared on her fair cheeks when she smiled. Ji Tianqing did not know much about the group since it was his first time meeting them. He only observed their expressions and actions silently and did not take the initiative to strike up a conversation. At that moment, Granny Long said kindly, "Everyone, you must help each other on Luotian Mountain in the future and improve together under the glory of the Divine Master." Although Ji Tianqing is a new God disciple, you must respect him as your eldest senior brother. You must not secretly exclude or criticize him. You are the God disciples selected from many geniuses. Not only are you the most talented, but you are also the most upright. If anyone dares to disobey my orders, don't blame me for using the law. Granny Long's tone was not harsh, but it had an unquestionable majesty. The God apostles nodded their heads to show that they understood. Lu Xiaomeng, who was the youngest, stuck out her tongue and said, "Granny Long, you worry too much. Senior brother Ji is the #1 genius of the three kingdoms. How would we dare to bully him? Even if we have the guts, we don't have the ability." Wenren Yu nodded and said with a smile, "Junior martial sister Xiao Meng is right. Senior martial brother Ji is a heavenly genius. We don't have the ability to suppress him." Heaven Absolute Divine Nation's Huang Qi was the best example. That Huang Qi is so outstanding, but when he met senior apprentice brother Ji, didn't he still end up dejected and in a sorry state? Hearing his words, everyone chuckled. Zhou Bin nodded in agreement and said with a solemn expression, "Not only is senior martial brother Ji's strength outstanding, but he is also eldest senior martial sister's husband. Together, they are the role model and leader of all God disciples. Who dares to bully them?" Seeing that no one was against Ji Tianqing, Granny Long was relieved. She nodded with a smile and said, "That's good. I am relieved that all of you can get along well." Then, she looked at Ji Tianqing kindly and asked, "Tianqing, you are new here and you have the reputation of being the #1 genius of the three kingdoms. Everyone is curious about you. Do you have anything you want to say to everyone?" Yin Yao and the God apostles turned their heads to look at Ji Tianqing with kind eyes. Ji Tianqing thought for a while and said calmly, "Junior martial brothers and sisters, if you have any problems in the future, you can come to me. If I can help you, I will do my best." These two sentences of his immediately won everyone's favorable impression. Yi Qing Luo, Wenren Yu and the others nodded with a smile and said, "Thank you, senior martial brother Ji. If we have any problems, we will definitely come to you." Lu Xiaomeng's big eyes looked around and she suddenly thought of something. She looked at Ji Tianqing with a smile and said jokingly, "Senior martial brother Ji, there is no need to wait for the future. I have a question now and I want to ask you." Everyone turned their heads to look at her and teased her with a smile. "Xiaomeng is the one with the most ideas. Junior martial sister Xiaomeng, you are really not polite with senior martial brother Ji." Ji Tianqing nodded at Lu Xiaomeng and said, "Junior martial sister Xiaomeng, ask away." Lu Xiaomeng immediately revealed a sly smile, and two small dimples appeared on her pretty face. "Senior martial brother Ji, can you tell us what it is like in the ruins of God? Did you find anything in the ruins of God?" Hearing this question, the God apostles looked expectant. Even Granny Long looked at Ji Tianqing and said with a smile, "Xiaomeng, you have hit the nail on the head. To be honest, I would like to know too. However, this is related to Tianqing's privacy. If he doesn't want to tell us, don't force him." Ji Tianqing didn't want to tell the truth, but seeing everyone's expectant eyes, he smiled and said, "The ruins of God is actually an alternate dimension and a cemetery. There were countless tombs in the mausoleum, where the gods of various races were buried since ancient times. As for what I found in the ruins of God, it is not worth mentioning. It can't help me increase my strength at all." Hearing this, everyone had a better understanding of the ruins of God. As for what he found, he didn't want to talk about it and the others didn't ask anymore. Next, Lu Xiaomeng and Yi Qing Luo asked a few more questions. These questions had nothing to do with martial arts cultivation. They were all gossip about life and relationships. For example, Yi Qing Luo asked Ji Tianqing how he met Yun Yao and how he captured Yun Yao's heart. Lu Xiaomeng's questions were even more tricky. She asked if Ji Tianqing was afraid of his wife. Would he want a son or a daughter in the future? These quirky questions amused everyone to the point of snickering endlessly, and the atmosphere became extremely lively and cheerful. Yunyao didn't feel embarrassed or angry. She just looked at Ji Tianqing quietly and waited for his answer. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing used his outstanding wisdom and reaction to deal with these questions. Everyone chatted in the hall for half a day and closed the distance between them. It was late at night that everyone returned to their rooms to rest. Ji Tianqing followed Yunyao back to her room. The two hugged each other intimately for a while before they began to talk about business. Only now did Ji Tianqing tell Yunyao about his experience and knowledge in the ruins of God with a serious expression. In the cemetery of the gods, there are hundreds of tombs lined up from the foot of the mountain to the peak. I found the tomb of the white dragon god and saved a wisp of his remnant soul. Unfortunately, I didn't find Kenshin's tomb. Old man of the ruins of God said that Kenshin didn't really die. However, I saw the tomb of the Jade Light God King on the mountain peak. Chapter 1688. After listening to Ji Tianqing's story, Yunyao was rather shocked. She pondered for a moment before saying, 1,000 years ago, Kenshin and Divine Lord White Dragon perished one after another. Divine Lord White Dragon's tomb is in the ruins of gods, but Kenshin's tomb isn't there. If things are as Old Man Godly Ruins said, the ruins of gods are the greatest secret in the world. As long as a god of this world perishes, a tomb will appear in the ruins of gods. This means that Kenshin didn't really perish. Perhaps he will be like other gods, leaving behind a wisp of his remnant soul. He will awaken and be reborn, or reincarnated. At this point, Yunyao stared at Ji Tianqing and said in a serious tone, "Tianqing, have you ever thought that you are actually?" Ji Tianqing nodded and revealed a playful smile. "I've actually suspected this question a long time ago, but unfortunately, I've never been able to verify it. In the past year or so, memories of Kenshin would often appear in the depths of my soul. I believe this is not a coincidence. There must be a reason." Yunyao nodded slightly and comforted him. "Don't worry. The truth will surface sooner or later. Perhaps when you are strong enough, you will be able to solve the mystery." Ji Tianqing acknowledged and stopped discussing the topic. "I saw Divine Monarch Naker Light's tomb at the peak of the cemetery of the gods. I tried to communicate with the tomb, and after a long time, I sensed that there was a divine power aura hidden in the tomb. Unfortunately, before I could figure out what the divine power was, I expended too much energy and fainted. When I woke up, the one-day deadline was up. Old Man Godly Ruins sent me out of the ruins of gods." Sigh. What a pity. If I could obtain that divine power aura, it would definitely be of great benefit to you. Yunyao held his hands and said calmly, "You have already done your best. Don't blame yourself or feel regret." Old Man Godly Ruins also said that everything depends on fate. Perhaps it's because your opportunity hasn't arrived yet, that's why you can't obtain that ball of divine power. However, if there's a chance in the future, I'll definitely enter the ruins of gods personally to take a look at God King Nakrolite's tomb." Ji Tianqing smiled. "Now that you are the reincarnation of the Nakrolite goddess, if you can reach her tomb, you'll definitely be able to obtain that ball of divine power." "Yes." Yunyao nodded slightly and said calmly, "We can't rush this matter. I've only just awakened some memories of Goddess Yaoguang, and my strength is increasing rapidly. In a few more years, when I become stronger and awaken more memories, I might have more confidence in going to the ruins of God. Let's not talk about this for now. Let me tell you about the Luo River God Nation." Ji Tianqing nodded. "All right." Yunyao calmly explained, "The Luoshui Divine Kingdom is located to the east of Shenwu Continent, and the easternmost part of the continent is the Endless Sky Sea. It was said that on the other side of the Heavenly Sea was another continent. However, the Heavenly Sea was sealed by a deity, so it could not be crossed. The Luoshui Divine Kingdom's national strength is comparable to the boundless Divine Kingdom, and it might even be slightly stronger. There are a total of 7 empires, and each empire has billions of cultivators and commoners. It has been peaceful for thousands of years. In the middle of the 7 empires, there is a sacred land of martial arts known as Luoshui Mountain. This is a training ground established by the Luoshui Divine Lord. Currently, there are only 10 God disciples left on Luoshui Mountain. Including you, there are 11 of them. Granny Long is highly regarded by the Luoshui Divine Lord, and she leads Luoshui Mountain. She also has 3 protectors and 7 divine envoys under her. Ji Tianxing listened quietly and quickly understood the situation at Luoshui Mountain. From his point of view, Luoshui Mountain's situation was very similar to God Sealing Mountains, and the relationships between the people were much simpler. This was beneficial for the God disciples to focus on their cultivation without having to waste time and effort to scheme against each other. An hour later, Yunyao finished explaining the situation at Luoshui Mountain in detail. The two chatted about other things, and Yunyao asked Ji Tianxing about his experiences and encounters over the past year. Ji Tianxing talked about the situation in Tianxian continent, as well as the destruction of the fiend race and the escape of the fiend emperor. Naturally, he mentioned the ghost race in Dark North Mountain, the 36 demon monarchs, the blood god, and so on. After a night, Ji Tianxing told Yunyao about his experiences over the past year in detail. Only then did Yunyao know how much pain and danger he had experienced, and how much pressure he had endured. This also made her cherish the present reunion even more. For the next 20 days, the flying ship sped through the sky. They passed through more than half of the heaven extinction divine nation, crossing hundreds of millions of miles of territory. During this period, Ji Tianxing and the other gods' disciples were meditating and cultivating in their own rooms. 25 days later, the flying ship finally returned to Luoshui Mountain. At this time, Ji Tianxing had already refined the azure wood divine power given to him by Old Man Godly Ruins after more than 20 days of cultivation. His body and essence soul had reached their peak state. His strength had also more than doubled, reaching the peak of the 8th level essence soul realm. Early in the morning, the sun had just risen. The ice-blue flying ship came to the peak of a 10,000-meter tall mountain and stopped. Granny Long transmitted her voice to the 6 god disciples. "Everyone, we have returned to Luoshui Mountain." When everyone heard her voice, they ended their cultivation and rushed to the spacious hall to gather. When Granny Long saw that everyone had arrived, she cast a spell and put away the ice-blue flying ship. Swoosh! With a flash of light, the flying ship disappeared. Everyone's figures appeared in the sky, standing directly above the 10,000-meter tall mountain. They saw that the sky above their heads was a clear blue, without any impurities. The sky around them was filled with white clouds and mist that flowed slowly like a stream. Below their feet was a 10,000-meter tall, ice-blue mountain. Even though the mountain was shrouded in clouds and the appearance of the mountain could not be seen clearly, it still exuded a sacred and majestic aura. The peak of the mountain was a flat land with a radius of 50 miles. On this flat land, there were more than 30 magnificent, simple, and elegant palaces, as well as more than a dozen residences. The extremely dense spiritual chi of heaven and earth formed 5-colored auspicious clouds that covered the palaces. Squads of guards in ice-blue armor were patrolling the palaces and mansions. This was the martial arts sacred ground of the Luoshui divine nation, Luoshui Mountain. Ji Tianxing looked down at Luoshui Mountain and felt that it was filled with a peaceful and warm aura. He believed that the atmosphere here was better than Mount God and was more suitable for cultivation. "Let's go." Granny Long called out and led everyone through the defensive array and landed on Luoshui Mountain. Yi Qing Luo, Lu Xiaomeng, Zhou Bin, and the others said goodbye to everyone and returned to their own residences. In the end, only Granny Long, Ji Tianxing, and Yunyao were left. Granny Long looked at Yunyao and said with a smile, "Yunyao, Ji Tianxing has come to Luoshui Mountain." With his status and talent, I should arrange a palace for him. However, he is your husband and I would like to hear your opinion about his residence. Yunyao did not hesitate or feel embarrassed. She said naturally, Jianqing is my husband. How can I let him live elsewhere? It is not good for others to serve him. Chapter 1689. As for Ji Tianqing's residence, it was decided just like that. After Granny Long bade farewell, she rushed back to her residence to report to God Lord Luo Shui about Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing and Yunyao passed through several wide paths and walked towards the Cloud Water Palace in the depths of the palace complex. The two strolled leisurely, admiring the scenery of Luotian Mountain as they walked. Yunyao introduced the various palaces to Ji Tianqing, helping him familiarize himself with the situation of Luotian Mountain. After all, he was going to stay here for a long time, so he had to familiarize himself with the environment. An hour later, the two returned to Cloud Water Palace. This palace was located deep in the mountain peak, and there were many palaces and courtyards around it. Cloud Water Palace was 1,000 feet wide, with 3 floors and dozens of rooms. There were also 2 gardens, one at the front and one at the back. The resplendent palace was filled with golden beams and painted rafters. It was very luxurious and dignified. Ji Tianqing asked Yunyao and learned that Luotian Mountain had arranged dozens of guards and maids for Cloud Water Palace. Those guards were all elite soldiers, and the maids were all young and smart, obedient and sensible people. Fortunately, Yunyao did her best to stop Granny Long, leaving only the maids and guards. Otherwise, Granny Long would have arranged more than 100 guards and maids for her. In addition, Ji Tianqing discovered that Cloud Water Palace was protected by powerful divine arrays. There were also 4 sage-level arrays used to absorb heaven and earth spirit qi to aid cultivation. The heaven and earth spirit qi in Cloud Water Palace was 8 times denser than in other palaces. It was very beneficial to martial artists' cultivation. Ji Tianqing asked Yunyao and learned that Cloud Water Palace used to be martial god Luo Shui's residence. However, martial god Luo Shui resided in Outer Heaven Divine Palace and would not come to Luotian Mountain. Martial god Luo Shui was not married, and she did not have a divine son or divine daughter. Usually, she would send a message to Granny Long or send a divine official if there were any decrees or matters. Only when a divine official came to Luotian Mountain would she temporarily stay in Cloud Water Palace. All the signs indicated that Yunyao enjoyed the best treatment and the best cultivation resources in the Luotian Mountain. Ji Tianqing was not surprised at all, and he understood the real reason. After all, Yao Yao has inherited goddess Yao Guang's legacy and is the person the Luo Shui martial god values the most. No matter how generous Yao Yao's treatment is, it's not excessive. Yunyao led Ji Tianqing around the Cloud Water Palace before returning to their residence on the 2nd floor. The two of them had just reached the entrance of the living room when they saw a draconian man in golden armor. This person was tall and mighty. He had the body of a human, but he had a dragon head and a dragon tail. His skin was covered with dragon scales. Ji Tianqing immediately recognized that this golden-armored dragon man was the guard protecting Yunyao. His name was Jin Long. Jin Long bowed respectfully when he saw the two of them return. Jin Long greets Master and young Master Ji. Yunyao was afraid that Ji Tianqing would not recognize him, so she introduced him. Tianqing, this is Jin Long. He protects me with Black Eagle and is absolutely loyal to me. Ji Tianqing nodded at Jin Long and revealed a kind smile. Jin Long had always been taciturn and was not good with words. He did not know how to respond to Ji Tianqing and could only squeeze out a smile. However, he had a dragon head and his smile was rather strange, even a little sinister. Ji Tianqing did not say anything else and followed Yunyao into the living room. A 2-meter-tall enchanting woman in a black leather coat stood in the bright and luxurious living room. She had a hot figure and her long black hair was tied into a braid. There was a pair of black wings on her back. Her eyebrows and lips were dark purple in color. Her 10 fingers also had sharp and narrow fingernails that were like blades. When she saw that Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao had returned, she hurriedly came forward and bowed with a smile. Black Eagle greets Master. You're finally back. Master, this young master beside you should be young Master Ji, right? Yun Yao nodded and introduced the two of them calmly. Ji Tianqing nodded at Black Eagle and greeted him. Black Eagle stared at him excitedly. After sizing him up for a while, he bowed and said, Black Eagle greets young Master Ji. Master has been thinking about you day and night and has not been able to eat or sleep well. I didn't expect that Master would be reunited with young Master Ji after a trip to the ruins of God. Congratulations. Yun Yao revealed a smile and gave a simple explanation. Then, she led Ji Tianqing through the living room and into the bedroom. The spacious bedroom was decorated with simple decorations and furnishings, but it exuded an elegant aura. There was a faint fragrance in the air that made Ji Tianqing yearn for it. It was Yun Yao's unique body fragrance. Tianqing, you'll live here from now on. There are 2 secret rooms in the 2 corners of the room. It's perfect for us to cultivate in seclusion. Yun Yao stood in the room and pointed at the bookshelves in the 2 corners as she spoke to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing reached out and wrapped his arms around her slender waist. He pulled her into his embrace and whispered into her ear in a voice that only the 2 of them could hear, Ao Yao, do you really want to live in the same room as me? Aren't you afraid that I'll eat you? Yun Yao's cheeks flushed red. She leaned on his shoulder and said in a voice as soft as a mosquito's buzz, I'm your wife. Whether you eat me or not, you can eat me whenever you want. Moreover, we should have consummated our marriage 2 years ago when we got married. It's just that there were so many twists and turns that we delayed it until now. Hubby, it's been hard on you. Hearing her shy and timid words, Ji Tianqing's heart was tickled. He revealed a mischievous smile and said, I've been on the road for more than 20 days. I'm physically and mentally exhausted now. Yao, I'm a little tired. Why don't we go to bed and rest now? Yun Yao's pretty face turned even redder. Her cheeks burned, and her clear eyes were so gentle that they almost dripped with water. She leaned on Ji Tianqing's shoulder and asked in a weak voice, Tianqing, it's still daytime. We just came back. Wouldn't it be inappropriate to do it now? Ji Tianqing immediately smiled mischievously and said, Ahem. Hubby, I'm just saying. Consummating our marriage is such an important and sacred thing. Of course, we have to wait until night to avoid being disturbed. I still have some things to deal with, so I'll go out first. Yun Yao finally understood that he was deliberately teasing her. She couldn't help but glare at him reproachfully. You go ahead. I just came back. I also have some things to deal with. Then, the 2 of them left the room one after the other. Yun Yao took Black Shadow and left the Cloud Water Palace to deal with some private matters. Ji Tianqing entered the secret room, opened the Sword World, and summoned Ji Bai and Shohei. Before this, Ji Bai and Shohei had been healing and cultivating in the Sword World. After such a long time of recuperation, Ji Bai's injuries had long since healed, and his essence, energy, and spirit had recovered to their peak. The 2 of them appeared in the dark secret room and cupped their hands to Ji Tianqing. Master, why did you summon us? Chapter 1690. Ji Bai and Shohei clearly did not understand the situation. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to briefly explain what had happened before. After the 2 of them heard this, they were stunned. Master, you actually gave up on the vast divine nation and joined the Luoshui divine nation? Master, you actually have a wife. Your wife is the #1 god disciple of the Luoshui divine nation. Ji Bai's reaction could still be considered calm, he was originally rather cold. Shohei became even more excited. He looked at Ji Tianqing in disbelief and exclaimed with a complicated tone, "I really can't believe that you and Madam are both peerless geniuses." Ji Tianqing waved his hand and explained, "When I joined Mount God Bestowment, it was not to become a god's disciple, but to find the whereabouts of my wife. Now that I've reunited with her, of course I'll stay by her side and never leave her." Moreover, the Luoshui martial god had a close relationship with the Kenshin and had even received favors from the Kenshin. "If the Luoshui martial god knows that I'm here, he'll definitely take care of me." Ji Bai calmly nodded his head and said, "That's right. Furthermore, the Luoshui divine country is closer to the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. For us, it's more convenient." When Ji Bai mentioned the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, Ji Tianqing recalled the map of the Shenwu continent. The three divine kingdoms were located in the west, center, and east of the continent. The northernmost part of the Heaven-End God Nation was the North Underworld Mountain where the ghost race was entrenched. It was extremely dangerous. In the north of the Luoshui God Nation, there was an unclaimed region of 1 billion miles, and it was ruled by the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. "That's right, Ji Bai, Shohei, since you followed me to the Luo River God Nation, you should report back to the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. For the next period of time, I might stay in the Luoshan mountain and be safe. If you have something to do and need to leave, just do it. You don't have to protect me anymore." Ji Bai and Shohei looked at each other, then cupped their hands and bowed to Ji Tianqing. "Thank you, Master, for your help. We do have something to do and need to return to the Pillar of Heaven's mountains." Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "It's fine. Go ahead." Shohei added and explained, "Master, don't worry. We will deal with the matter as soon as possible and rush back to protect you. According to my estimation, he will be back in 3 months at most." "Yes, no problem." Ji Tianqing nodded his head again as he warned, "There's no time to lose. I'll send you all out of the Luoshan mountain now. It's a long journey back to Tianzhu mountain from here, so you have to pay attention to your safety." After that, Ji Tianqing personally sent Ji Bai and Shohei off. After the two of them left Luoshan mountain, Ji Tianqing returned to Cloud Water Palace. He had nothing to do, so he meditated in his bedroom and waited for Yunyao to come back. Soon, half a day had passed. By the time Yunyao finished her work and returned to her room, it was already night time. "Husband, sorry to keep you waiting." Yunyao looked at Ji Tianqing with an apologetic expression. Ji Tianqing sat on the spacious spiritual jade bed and looked at her with a smile. He patted the quilt next to him and said, "Yao Yao, you must be tired after a busy day, right? Come and rest." Yunyao revealed a shy expression. She lowered her head and said in a low voice, "Husband, don't be impatient. I'll go to the hot spring to bathe and clean my body first, then I'll come and serve you." Ji Tianqing had long known that she had the habit of soaking in hot springs, so he said with a mischievous smile, "Oh. Yao Yao, is there a hot spring in your bedroom too? Why don't I accompany you and wash your body and mind before resting? It'll be more solemn and holy." As he spoke, he got up and got out of bed without waiting for Yunyao's reply. He walked in front of Yunyao, stretched out his arms, and carried Yunyao in his arms. He then walked towards the back of the bedroom. Yunyao struggled a few times, but she couldn't break free from his embrace, so she could only let him hold her. There was a secret door at the back of the bedroom. After it was opened, it was connected to a secret room with a radius of 5 feet. This secret room was the hot spring, and the surrounding walls were embedded with moonstones. There were many rare gems scattered in the hot spring pool. The warm water in the pool was emitting steam in spirals, and the hundreds of gems at the bottom of the pool were emitting colorful brilliance, releasing invisible spiritual energy and power. Ji Tianqing carried Yunyao to the side of the pool and gently helped her take off her white dress bit by bit. Yunyao lowered her head in embarrassment. Her cheeks were flushed, and her pair of sparkling earlobes had also turned pink. After a while, the two of them took off their clothes and stepped into the hot spring together. Ji Tianqing didn't tease Yunyao anymore. He sat side by side with her in the pool, silently thinking about something. A few years ago, when the two of them were still in the Sky Pillar sect, they had also soaked in the hot spring together. However, at that time, the two of them hadn't confirmed their relationship, nor were they married. What happened that night was also a beautiful misunderstanding. Now, the two of them were in the same hot spring, and their identities were different. The two of them were officially husband and wife. There was no need to hide anymore, let alone hide. Ji Tianqing looked at Yunyao gently, enjoying the perfect and graceful scenery. This was the first time the two of them were naked to each other. Ji Tianqing feasted his eyes, and he was quite amazed in his heart. Yunyao's beauty was truly the product of the heavens and earth. She was as beautiful as the sun and moon. From head to toe, every part of her body was perfect. She was so beautiful that it shook one's soul, causing one to be captivated by it. She was simply a masterpiece of the Creator. 15 minutes later, the two of them had washed their bodies and minds, and their emotions were soothed and calmed down. Previously, Yunyao had been lowering her head and hugging her arms, blocking the most impressive scenery. Now that her emotions had calmed down, she no longer hid anything from Ji Tianqing. She allowed him to pull her into his arms and snuggle up to him intimately. Ji Tianqing's eyes became more and more passionate, and his body temperature kept rising. Yunyao's cheeks were already red, and her eyes were a little misty. Thus, Ji Tianqing carried her out of the hot spring. After circulating his energy to evaporate the water droplets all over their bodies, the two of them lay on the warm and pleasant jade bed. Ji Tianqing carried Yunyao with one hand and pulled up the quilt with the other. Then, he began a wonderful exploration under the quilt. Yunyao couldn't restrain her shyness, so she waved her hand and sent out a spiritual light to extinguish all the gemstone lights in the room. When the room fell into darkness and silence, she began to respond to Ji Tianqing's exploration. Not long after, Yunyao let out a slightly painful groan, and the two of them no longer had any gap between them, and they entered a wonderful and tender land together. The dimly lit room was filled with a warm and romantic atmosphere. Good times were always short. Ji Tianqing had been tormenting her for the whole night, but he was still a little unsatisfied. He had played with every beautiful scenery to his heart's content. It wasn't until dawn when Yunyao was a little tired that he stopped his invasion and fell asleep quietly with her in his arms. Yunyao nestled in his arms meekly and stared at him quietly. She felt his breathing and aura, and her emotions were complicated. Tianqing, from today onwards, we really belong to each other. You and I are a real husband and wife. We breathe together, share a destiny, and there is no barrier between us. In this life, no one and nothing can separate us. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.